Hello, Motorrad World fans, and welcome to another episode of Talking MotoGP with myself, Rob Portman, and Paul Scott. And this time we are focused on the Catalunya MotoGP that just took place this past weekend. And what a great weekend's racing it was once again. Paul, thank you so much for joining me once again.
Rob, always an absolute pleasure. Every week we say it, the racing just seems to be getting better and better. All categories. Once again, I've said it many times on this show. Moto3, you don't have to have a favorite. Just pick a number and off you go. Just enjoy the racing. Once again, a fantastic race. Moto2, a big surprise there with Ayagura coming from, he had a great start. I mean, they highlighted it. He had a great start, but nice racing. Now there's talk about him being ready for MotoGP. So does that mean Nakagami's on the way out? Let's see what happens there. But a great weekend and fantastic to be back on the show. And welcome to everyone who's tuned in.
Yeah, everyone's tuning in. A big thank you, of course, to Rad KTM and Rad Paul, Husqvarna, Ridgeway Race Bar. And of course, if you're tuning in on YouTube, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button to our channel. And if you're on Facebook, hit like and just share this post as far and wide as possible. We've got Gordon De Beer, Dick Crosby, Van Erasmus, Yvonne Pretorius, Paola Chiacchetti, Nicole Briet, Jonathan Murphy, Al Camino, Daniela Kirby from Bean Productions, the amazing Bean Productions crew. Luca Jefferson, as always, Daryl Holmes, Gavin Silverstein, Dave McBrain, Robert Swart, Sean Clarsons is joining us as well. Do you see, guys, YouTube comments? Robert Swart, yes, we do. I've just seen your comments. So, yeah, please, everybody, that's just a reminder, get your comments in. We'll try and pick them out as we possibly can. Obviously, there's a lot to talk about. But send your comments, send your questions in, and myself and Paul and the rest of the people tuning in will try and answer those to the best of our ability. Anton Smith, hello, Rob and Paul. Excellent weekend. Lots to talk about. Silly season. Roll on, and that's exactly there's so much to talk about, the silly season on and off track. So let's jump straight into it. I think the biggest talking point started with the sprint race, Paul, heading into the weekend. Well, before we even got into the weekend, the big news, of course, is Aleix Espargaro called a special press conference, and you always know what's going to happen with those. Aleix Espargaro calling time on his MotoGP career at the end of this year. And I was watching it, and you can't help but get emotional when you see any sportsman, whether you love them or hate them, everything they've committed and been through, when they call their time on and the tears start flowing there, you can't help but get emotional. But I couldn't help but think after the weekend, and I still remember thinking in that spot, I said, watch this. I know we joke about who writes a script for MotoGP, but watch Aleix Espargaro go, put it on pole position, and you probably win both races. Look, Aleix Espargaro, it's a racetrack that he loves. It's his home circuit. He did it last season. So, the writing's on the wall in many ways, but just watch this happen. And true as nuts, there goes Espargaro, pole position, fastest ever lap around the circuit that he loves so much. Sprint race win. We'll talk about that now. And then just missing out on the podium on Sunday. But Yvonne Pretorius, Rob, there's talk. Andrea Consey's surname from World Superbikes will be getting the Aprilia ride. Yvonne, we'll definitely touch upon that. But just on the Aleix subject, we've spoken about him countless times. There's times where you want to wear the Aleix Espargaro cap and shirt and proudly show it off, and then there's times where you want to hide it in the cupboard because he opens his mouth and just does stupid things as he did last year with his pit crew and stuff. But I think in general, Aleix can look back at his career. Yeah, he hasn't won championships and that, but certainly the last couple of years, he can look back at himself and pat himself on the back for a great career.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they mentioned in that press conference, or he did, it's 20 years in MotoGP. That's a proper career. And the fact that he never won a championship, obviously to him is disappointing, but it just shows how talented he actually is to be there for 20 years. Yeah, it helps. He obviously has very good personal sponsors. If anyone follows him on social media, there's not a car in the world that he doesn't own that every one of us would like. He's got Porsches, Lambos, Ferraris, but he's done something right, and he's superbly fast. His legacy, I think, and we'll see what happens next year going forward, but his legacy is certainly going to be that he's got this Aprilia to a point where it's very competitive.
Yes.
The fact that they're up against the most competitive and dominating bike that we've seen for probably ever. I don't even think the Honda years ago was as dominant, maybe quite, but I mean, this Ducati dominates. And yet he's got that Aprilia Tour bike that can win races. He's won. Maverick's won. Raul Fernandez was fantastic on the weekend. So certainly, I think that's going to be his legacy. The little temper tantrums, we all forget, I'm going to say the bad. You always forget that. And I think Aleix is going to walk away from here as someone who MotoGP are going to say, well, that was the guy who got Aprilia to this point. Where they go from here, time will tell. But certainly, I think a lot of credit to him and well done to him on a sterling career. And I'll say that he's certainly never been one of my favorites. But, you've got to admire the guy, everything about him. And one thing I really take my hat off to him about, his family life. His wife and kids are certainly number one in his life. How he's juggled family, MotoGP, cycling, he's really done it very well. So big kudos to him. And I wish him all the best for his future, whatever that might be.
Yeah, Van Erasmus kind of just says exactly what you said, but he developed a great bike. That is his legacy, like him or not. And you have to pat him on the back for that. As you said, when no one else wanted to go to Aprilia. I remember those years where Joe Roberts was snubbing Aprilia MotoGP, and Aleix I don't think Aleix had many other options, but he still bravely took it and he stayed there, through thick and thin. He stayed there. He's developed the bike. El Capitano, as we know him, Aprilia, pat on the back to them as they built a great environment there. That Maverick in many ways is now flourishing, and other riders as well. So, I think Aleix, as you said, and I've said it many, many times, one of the biggest things that stands out for me with Aleix is the family environment. When I went to the racetrack and I saw what a dedicated father he is with his kids and his and a husband with his wife in that environment, it can't be easy, yet he just made it work. The kids are always smiling, the wife's always smiling. They're traveling the world. They just look like this happy family, and in a high pressure environment like MotoGP, that couldn't have been easy, and he's made it work. And what really impressed me this weekend, I know there was the extra added motivation of Barcelona. I've retired now. In many ways, it's a big weight off my shoulder to go to still at MotoGP at its highest level with Ducati where it is, Pecco, Martin, Marc Marquez, Brad Binder, Pedro Acosta, all these stars, Aleix Espargaro at 30, whatever age he is, to put it on pole position and still be able to compete with these guys. I really took, it was one of those weekends where the Aleix exercise just excelled itself, and you proudly want to wear the Aleix Espargaro t-shirt. Little Big Media Code didn't Aleix win the B class championship when the Control ECU were introduced? That's pretty much where he made his name on those Evo bikes, as they were called. He was dicing with the MotoGP bikes, and that's, I think, what propelled him into the Suzuki MotoGP ride. We forget he was on Pramac Ducati. The guys that he has. I was watching the runbacks of Aleix Espargaro, from his 250 Grand Prix days to 9, and you do forget how long the guy's been there. But, kudos to him. As you said, it's not easy. I did it for 8 months of that traveling and stuff. And it's not an easy exercise to do. Throw in family and other commitments and stuff. Again, hold my hands up to him and just say, career well done, job well done. And, wish him all. What I did find interesting, Paul, was it looked cast in stone that he was going to be a team, kind of test rider. And in the press scrum or in one of the media scrums, it was, I'm thinking about a test rider role, maybe not with Aprilia and someone else. So there's kind of this, El Capitano now talking about potentially, but I mean, can you see that? Could you see a Honda wanting to break the bank? We've spoken about it. Honda and Yamaha need a faster, current rider. Could Honda be going to him and saying, listen, we'll break the bank and come on board? And could Aleix say, you know what, why not take on that challenge? I've done the Aprilia thing. There's nothing more to do there. Let me jump ship to Honda.
Well, when I heard that, I was wondering, has he actually been forced out of Aprilia? Was the decision made for him? That he was told there's no ride for you, and we'll discuss it, I'm sure. Because he did make the statement, if I'm a test rider, there's every likelihood it won't be with Aprilia. Yeah. Those were his words. So something suddenly changed. I don't know, maybe. There's lots of talk about him going to Yamaha as their test rider, but certainly you and I have discussed it how many times, Rob? Honda should throw the biggest checkbook at him, because look where Bradl finished on the weekend. And no disrespect to the guy, but I think he hasn't raced competitively in MotoGP for a hell of a long time. I think it must be 6 seasons now, maybe 5.
Mm.
Get Aleix on that bike. He's fresh off the grid. He's one of the top 5 consistently. And let him try and figure out something as opposed to having Bradley. You and I have discussed it. I'm sure a lot of people will agree with that. But whatever way it goes, it certainly seems like it's not going to be with Aprilia, which is really surprising. Eh?
Yeah, it was surprising. So let's go through Sunday results and go through each rider, and we can, pick apart from the sprint race to Sunday's main race. Pecco Bagnaia took the win on Sunday after a disastrous Saturday where, and the commentators actually put it perfectly over the weekend. There seems to be this growing question mark with Pecco Bagnaia. The one commentator was still saying, sorry, I just keep watching that top left-hand corner. Yeah. Every time Pecco goes through turn 5, even though he's comfortably on the lead, because it's almost like you can't trust, you just can't trust Pecco Bagnaia anymore because he was comfortable. Pecco's out front, everything's going well. Bam, down goes Pecco Bagnaia turn 5, and you're going, geez, and Pecco's got to start picking up points in sprint races. He won last year's World Championship, not too focused on sprint races, but more Sunday. He's dug himself a hole where, listen, Saturdays count just as much as Sundays now. So that really kicked him in the teeth, and it was vital. It was so vital that he bounced back on Sunday, and boy did he bounce back on Sunday. Because at one stage I thought, okay, Martin's got this guy's card again, and true Pecco Bagnaia champion. He's done it so many times. Write him off at your peril. The guy is just he's just this perfect illustration of a champion. Churned it out. I don't know if that ranch riding, where they're always riding on the dirt and getting bikes loose. I don't know if that helped him at a track like Catalunya where the tire's always spinning in that. But he just seemed to have it all under control. While others, the tire dropped, Martin's tire dropped, others crashed, and blah. While all this chaos was going on around him, especially after what happened on Saturday, he just brought it all back down to earth and put in the perfect ride on Sunday.
Yeah, that's exactly how it was. But what you say about Saturday being so important, last year it seemed to be less of an importance. Yeah, you got those extra points if you finished in the points first to 9th place. And it didn't upset him too badly last year in terms of his points in the championship. But this year, did they say he's finished 1 sprint race this year? I can't remember the stats. But, every time that he finishes out of the points in a sprint race and Martin is in the points, he's losing 12 points at a shot. But he's only making up on Sunday, he only made up 5 points. So he's actually a net loss of 7 points. You can't be doing that. He was very good Friday, Saturday, qualifying Friday. He was fast the whole time. So I really thought once he was in the lead, I thought, well, in the sprint, this is it. He's just going to run away with it. And I mean, what did they say? 9 corners, 1 lap to go, and he dumps it. Those are the mistakes. And then, as you say, in the main race, you're watching the top left-hand corner all the time. He held it all together, and he came from behind Martin, which he hasn't done too often this season. I still think Martin's got his number. Barcelona, very difficult track. It seems like that turn 5 and I think it was turn 10, the 2 left-handers, cold tires or cooler tires, a little bit of a negative camber, not the grippiest surface. It seems like you really had to be on your A game in terms of sensitivity there. And it caught out many people. But Sunday, he can do that. We've mentioned it, Rob. Sunday, his game face looks exactly the same as Saturday, but his game brain is different. Now he's got to rewire that to be a little bit more focused like Martin seems to be able to do. Saturday afternoon, full focus, 100%. Even though Martin finished 4th, that's fine. Then Sunday, you've got to have the same concentration. But Pecco, once again, when Martin passed him, got into the lead, pulled a bit of a gap in the main race, I thought, this is it. It's done and dusted. You never write that Pecco off. He's certainly, as we've said, Rob, he's a worthy champion, and he just doesn't seem to faze him, the little errors from Saturdays or whatever. But you're quite right. Saturday has become so important. He needs to do whatever he has to do to make sure he starts collecting the points on a Saturday.
Yeah, just to Gary Kays and everyone in the comments, we of course are going to talk about Brad. We're just going to go through each rider individually. Brad is going to be a big talking point. Pedro Acosta is going to be a big talking point as always. So yeah, we just stick with us. We've got a lot to talk about this evening. that turn 5, I went to Catalunya a couple of years ago for the first time, and on TV it just looks like a slightly downhill left-hander. Let me tell you, it is America corkscrew kind of downhill stuff. I was amazed with the undulation at Catalunya. Even some of those turns that look flat, trust me, they are not there, up and down. So that turn 5, you are going really downhill, hard on the brakes, and trying to get the bike turned. And as Brad said, he was asked in the debriefing, why are so many riders getting caught out with this turn 5? And he just said, it's a combination of things. It's the first left-hander for a while. You go down the straight, you go through the chicane, then it's right, and then left. So maybe optimum temperature's not there. It's the downhill gradient, as you were talking about. And it might just be one of those corners that you think you can make time up on. But having watched it, and when we get to Pedro Acosta, I'll dive into it more. Some riders have got that line perfect. It almost seemed if you wanted to take the premium, go wide and bring it in line, you were just almost too long on the brakes trying to do that. If I look at Pedro Acosta, and what amazed me about the way he was riding that Catalunya circuit, he made it very short. So he wasn't going curb to curb. He was almost riding in the middle of the track, which made the track short, which meant he wasn't on the brakes, trail braking while turning for as long. So there were a couple of factors that I looked at Pecco. Even Pecco, I saw his line change from Saturday to Sunday in that turn. He wasn't going this wide sweeping line. So you're coming right, you're staying right, and then flicking it left, but making left a longer left. Pedro was almost coming right, straightening up, and making the left a bit tighter, but not coming from so wide and being on the brakes for so long, especially on that gradient. So it's a real tricky one. You're right about Catalunya. I've been, and there's a lot more change in elevation that you would expect Olimoto. I stood trackside there and went, am I at Catalunya? I couldn't believe the elevation. And it's amazing. You drive into Catalunya, you drive into like an industrial business park, and you're like, gee, is this really where the track is? And all of a sudden, there's this track in the middle of this industrial park. But the big thing with Pecco Bagnaia now is this pressure that he's got to deal with in the championship. He's running out of races. There's still a lot of races left, but the Saturdays are becoming more important. And the fact that he can't mess up Saturdays or Sundays now. So we're going to have to wait and see how Pecco deals with this and his team deal with it. You could see Tardozzi. That was the most frustration I've seen from Tardozzi in a long time. He almost giggled about it. He almost laughed and went, is this guy for real? Is this guy for real? So, yeah, that third championship in a row, he's dug himself a hole. I said it just now. He's dug himself this hole now that he's got to somehow not dig it any deeper. So now all of a sudden your whole game plan changes from Saturday to Sunday. There's no more of this grace period and, okay, I don't have to get this Saturday right. I've got to get every single Saturday and every single Sunday right now because Martin's hardly getting them wrong. Marc's looking like this reinvigorated kind of exercise. So the pressure's on Pecco. Even though he won the race, don't get me wrong, he won that race, man, but the pressure's on for the rest of the season.
Yeah, well, as I said, he lost 7 points in the championship. He gained nothing over the weekend, even though he won. So, yeah, he's definitely... Look, I think he's shown us many times, especially this season with his dices with Martin. He's got the mettle to be in this fight. It's certainly, but the pressure's going to start getting to him. In football, in rugby, they call it scoreboard pressure. You look up and you see there's 15 minutes left and you a goal behind or a try behind or whatever it is. That's pressure. You start thinking about that, not about your game. And if he keeps doing what he's doing now, losing 7 points a weekend, even if he next weekend at Mugello, he pulls back 7, that means for 2 weekends he stayed static. It's going to get to a point where that scoreboard pressure is going to start being more because, at the moment, Martin, even after Mugello, he walks away with the championship in his pocket or the lead. So that's putting more pressure on Pecco. So, he's going to, as you say, he's going to get to a point where he can't have one bad day every weekend. We've said it before. It's going to happen to Pecco, to Martin. It's going to happen to Marc. They're going to have one crash between now and the end of the year in a race. It's going to happen. That's MotoGP racing. But Pecco's had he's had 3 already. So he's kind of used up his get out of jail free cards, if that's the right thing to say. So it's going to be very interesting. Me personally, every time I think he's on the back foot, like this weekend, he just shows us that he's made of sterner stuff and write him off at your peril. Remember when he beat Quartararo 2 years ago? What did he come from behind? 90. With 5 or 6 races to go, about 60 points. So, just bear that in mind. I think the situation is way different this year. The pressure is going to be more. It's the same bike where then he was racing against the Yamaha on maybe a better bike. It's going to be difficult. He's going to have to really just make sure Saturdays are no longer a write-off day for him. He can't afford to do that.
Yeah, a couple of people in the comments as well. Olimoto is saying, Pecco he did that 90-point recovery a couple of years ago, and him and his team have this ability to reset, refocus, and go. I just think with this Martin looking a bit more, we've spoken about it, this mature kind of guy. Yes, he made a mistake a couple of rounds ago, but he does look a lot more mature and settling. Marc looks like the whole exercise looks a lot different, and I think it's pretty much those three really. Just a couple of others have kind of fallen off. I think it's going to be a straight fight between Martin and Pecco, really. Although Marc's, not showing any signs of getting. But anyway, I just think it's a different exercise, and Martin is so determined. It also depends on what's going to happen with this contract talk and that, if Ducati snub him, Martin's going to just really want to take this championship and do it. There's so many factors to play. Pecco has proved it. We know. I don't doubt him for a second. But as you said, that scoreboard pressure's there, and you're going to be looking at that. It's going to be. I remember, was it Cole Fogarty that said, when you're in this kind of position, you start coming into your pit box and where's Martin? Or, you start analyzing things and overthinking things. So, but having said that, as Olimoto and you've kind of said, Pecco is able to almost in a way reset, refocus himself. He's got the team to do it. They've been there. They've done it 2 years in a row. So we can't count out the Pecco Bagnaia exercise at the moment. Martin in second place. It was a weird weekend for Martin because he showed pace. He showed he had the pace on the Friday and the Saturday. He just, we know what happened in the sprint race. Kind of in a way got lucky. Raul Fernandez, Brad crashed out, Pecco crashed out. So yeah, but you've got to finish to take advantage of this season. Martin did that. It was a weird one. He almost knew that there was too much of a risk to do much more. The track's not great. I know I'm fast, but there's just too much at risk here. There's just too much at risk. So I'll take what I can get. And it was a champion's performance, a championship winning performance in a way, because that's how you win championships. Right. Pecco crashed out on Saturday. I brought it home. Sunday, cool. I didn't beat Pecco, but as you said, I didn't lose anything. I didn't, I lost 5 points on Sunday, but I gained, what it was 12 on Saturday. So Martin, it's, as I said, it's a different animal we're playing with this year with Martin, because he seems to have his head on a lot more focused on championship rather than I'm going to go break lap records every lap and be the star on the front of the cover in terms of lap times. So, this is the animal that Pecco and Ducati have to deal with at the moment.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's a headache for them quite yet, because there's still a long way to go. But one thing he's done is, for the 6 rounds we've had this year, he's been the strongest rider. That's why he's leading the points. He's won. When he's had a bad day, a la Saturday where he only finished 4th, Sunday he finished 2nd. I think you're quite right, Rob. He said in his head, this is the best I'm going to get on Saturday, 4th place. He's not going to take any risks. Yeah, it wasn't a hell of a lot of points. Sunday, he was good. He led the race. Then Pecco passed him. And even in his interview, he said, I didn't have the pace to go with him. So instead of maybe last year, the last 4 races, Jorge Martin flat out, I'll show this Oak who's faster, and then crashing, he said, well, take a step back. He's walked away with 20 points. I think it was a fantastic, by his standards, not a great weekend, but it was a mature weekend in that he finished both races, got the points. Remember, if I remember correctly, he crashed in Q2. So that's why he ended up 6th on the grid. He's not used to that. I don't know when last year was on the 2nd row of the grid. He didn't have bad starts, but he didn't have great starts. So I think he was a little bit circumspect, and it's a track that is a bit dodgy. Turn 5, turn 10, we know that. So he didn't take any risks, brought the bike home, walks away with the same championship lead. And it's, for this time of year, I think it's a healthy lead. I'd rather be in that situation than leading by 1 or 2 points. So I think a very good all-round performance from him. If the decision is made this weekend as to announce who the factory rider is going to be, let's be quite honest. If you're voting with your head, it has to be him. He's the best rider out there at the moment. I don't want to say by a long shot, but clearly he's the guy to have. if he doesn't get the ride, exactly what you say, he's either going to go flat out to drill these Oaks, or he's going to be like he was last year and the year before. He's going to be miffed, and it's going to upset his riding, and he's going to just lose the plot. So it's a touch and go. I have my doubts as to whether they'll announce it this weekend. I don't know. What do you think? Is it not too early? Or they're not going to wait another month? I don't know. You know, they keep saying, they being the journalists in the know. I don't think Gigi D'Alino's put a date on it, but maybe he has. But certainly everyone is saying this weekend the announcement will be made.
So, Paul, that was exactly where I was going to go next, because a lot of people are commenting here. Constanolius Martin to Aprilia, Pramac to Yamaha, Marc to stay at Cressini with factory GP25, and Anea to stay Red Ducati. Jaden Stayman, Martin and Pecco is going to end the year in fireworks. Don't see Martin getting that factory ride, and this is going to make him reckless. Olimoto, I can't see Bastianini keeping the Ducati factory seat, and I am not sure Pramac will move to Yamaha. So, Paul, let me break it down for you, what I think. The big piece in this puzzle was Fermin Aldeguer. Ducati have committed to him. Ducati have signed him. They were putting him in Pramac. Then the spanner in the works came that now Pramac could potentially go Yamaha. That would have kicked Ducati in the teeth properly, because now all of a sudden they've got too many riders and too little bikes. So if they put Martin in the factory team, great. Bastianini goes to Aprilia, cool. Marquez goes there. Then they would have to put Aldeguer in the Cressini team. Okay, that's okay. The situation now looks like Pramac are going to stay Ducati, and I think it's Ducati upping the ante with Pramac. I think Pramac held Ducati by the balls. They held all the power in this negotiation, because Ducati needed them more than they needed Ducati in many ways. Because if I'm Pramac, I'm looking at going, you know what? Okay, well, we've had a good couple of years. We could potentially win the championship this year, but let's go with Yamaha. It's big money. It's this big kudos, and we're changing bikes completely in 2027 anyway. So let's get a head start with that, and you know, it's a win-win situation, I think, for Pramac, especially if they win the title this year with Martin. Then, you know, go Yamaha. It looks like that's died down now, that talk. Looks like Yamaha, and the last I heard was that Yamaha are going to focus a lot more resources into their test team, because they're not going to have the satellite team. And I think that was purely Ducati saying, right, we need Pramac, because ideally they need this move to happen. Of Bastianini's gone. I think Bastianini's out of the factory team this weekend. The double long lap penalty that he didn't serve. I don't know. There doesn't seem to be any focus on Bastianini from the Ducati team. It looks like he already knows. They've already made his mind up. It's between Martin and Marc. I look at it and I just don't know. Are Ducati brave and sly enough to try and go, right, let's try and help Pecco out here. Let's not give Martin the ride. Hopefully that it upsets him and makes him reckless, as Jaden says here, and puts him off for this championship, to let our blue-eyed boy Pecco go for the championship and upset the rhythm of Martin, because we can afford to lose him, because we've got Marquez. You know, this is our big marketing tool. Put him on our bike, 8-time world champion, all the data that comes with him, all the knowledge that comes with him, all the prestige that comes with him. You know, are they big and brave enough to do that and snub Martin? You know, as you said, on paper, it's Martin all day. It's if you gave it to someone that's not in follow MotoGP and you say, how does this play out? It's Martin all day. But there's this Marc Marquez that Gigi D'Alino does, and Ducati do have a soft spot for somewhere, you know. So I don't know. Martin, Aleix, you know, kind of mentioned, and his name's been mentioned with a Aprilia ride as well. If, you know, and this is, do Aprilia wait on Bastianini to see if Martin is available? You know, Martin's still shutting his mouth off, kind of, that he hasn't been offered anything, and he's still, I don't know. I just worry how Ducati are going to manage a Pecco and a Martin in a team. I think that's going to be hard management. There's also the case, the same with Marquez of the Red Bull and Monster sponsorship. You know, that's a big hurdle for both of them. If Martin goes factory Ducati, I could see him being swayed by Monster. That's fine. Marquez, I can't see breaking that Red Bull bond. You know, I could see him going to Pramac or potentially staying with Cressini, but I don't know. A lot of people are up in arms on the side in the comments as well, just not knowing. It could go anyway. They say the announcements this weekend, but now I saw today that potentially it's going to be postponed. I don't know. On one hand, I think Martin maybe shouted his mouth off a bit too much, and Ducati don't like that. And Ducati will go, you know what, be gone. Aprilia have kind of said it already. Finally, it looks like we're going to have an Italian rider on our bike, which, you know, means Bastianini. And then there's still this Marc saying, yeah, I'm honored to be considered for this position after 6 races on a Ducati. I don't know. I don't know. Your guess is just as good as mine and everyone else's.
Yeah, and I mean, we're going round and round in circles here because only one person knows. When I say one person, Gigi Dell'Igna and whoever he consults with, they're the only people who know. My sentiment would be, I think if they put Martin on the Ducati, we've discussed it. He is a very different guy to Bastianini and to Pecco. So it could cause that Rossi, Lorenzo wall down the middle of the garage, which Ducati don't want. Ducati like everything to be kumbaya, happy family, everyone chats to everyone. So that could be the upsetting, the fly in the ointment. Marc, to me, does he deserve the ride? On his performance this year, no, Martin deserves the ride. But on Marc, and we've discussed it, what he brings to the party in terms of, let's be quite honest, the media focus around him, then Pedro Acosta, then everybody else. That's just how it is. You can't change that. So that's a big draw card for Ducati. I think that what's going to happen, I think Martin's going to end up on the factory Ducati. Marc is going to stay in Gresini, and they're going to give him a factory bike. That's what I think he's going to play out. To me, that would be, for Marc, that would be prize number 1, because he's very happy where he is. He just wants a better bike. He's just said, give me the same equipment. He's with his brother. That family unit is very tight. So I think for Marc, that would be fine. He wouldn't stress about that at all. The Monster versus Red Bull story for Marc Marquez, he's been a Red Bull sponsored athlete from when he was 13 years old. So now that's a big bond to break. So I think that's a bit of a problem there. What actually isn't going to happen, Rob? I don't know. One thing I'm 99% sure, and so are you, Bastianini's out. And I do think he'll go to Aprilia, which closes that door for Martin. But now there's big talk about Martin going to KTM. And for the first time, Pit Byra didn't deny it. He didn't say he's not going there, but he didn't say he's not going, and he didn't say yes, he is. So I don't know. Whether he ends up there, I don't know. I just don't know. It's so open, and he's obviously the draw card, but he has voiced his opinion too many times if Ducati management don't like it. And they're going to say, well, if you think you're that good, show us what you can do on the Aprilia or the KTM or the Yamaha or the Honda. So he's walking on it. We've said it before. He's walking on a very fine line, but he's letting his results do the biggest negotiating for him.
Yeah, Karen, Jaden, everyone asking about Brad and the rumors there. We'll get to that when we talk about him, obviously. One thing that Pitt kind of did dismiss straight away is the exercise of Marc Marquez potentially going to KTM, because at one stage that was up in the air. That's kind of been narrowed down. They said they can't, kind of go with that kind of personality and blah, 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 whatever. As you said, the Martin to KTM's still a possibility. The telltale sign there was when Pit Byra said, oh, our kind of gripes with Martin, because remember, when Martin came into MotoGP, he was a contracted KTM rider. He snubbed their contract, cancelled his contract to go to Ducati because he didn't want to be on the KTM bike. So there was big kind of headbutts there. They seem to have settled that argument. So when he said that, when Pitt said that, I was like, okay, well, that means they are definitely talking. And there's no doubt Martin is talking to every Honda, even he's talking to. There's no doubt about it, because he wants to be able to have all the cards and then go, right, if Ducati get rid of me, I've got these. So there's no doubt he's had talks with every single person there. Monster didn't sponsor Ducati when Miller was riding for them, Olimoto, I know that, but now they are a big team sponsor. And I did see a release saying that potentially Ducati are going to have to give up this Monster. Look, I know Johnny Ray was a Red Bull athlete through and through. He came through the Red Bull Academy in the UK, and then he turned into a Monster rider. So we've seen these changeovers, but I don't know, the Marc Marquez just seems cast in stone with Red Bull. Anyway, let's get on to Marc Marquez. I saw Nadia Padovani from Gresini come out and say she's going to do everything she can to keep Marc Marquez. I look at the Marc Marquez exercise. As I said, I thought his weekend was good. He didn't have the pace. He went out and said he didn't have the pace. It's a track that he's never liked. He's actually never really gone that well. He's had a couple of good performances, but never really been one of his shining tracks. And he went out there. Did he? I don't even think he crashed throughout the entire weekend. Didn't crash throughout the entire weekend. Spent a lot of Friday on old tires trying to get race pace. So this Marc Marquez exercise is just fantastic at the moment. He's just smiling. I see how he celebrates with the team after, second and third places. And I know there's a whole thing on Facebook and the social world about people celebrating second and third as a win, blah, blah, and comparing him to Rossi when he moved to Yamaha. And I don't do any of that. I look at weekend by weekend now. And I'm loving the Marc Marquez. He's smiling. He's happy. He celebrates on that podium in third place, in second place. The team love him. So I almost look at that as a sign to say, Marc, if I was Marc, I would be saying, you know what, just give me the factory bike. As you said, give me the factory bike, give me the money, but let me stay in this environment. Why? I know a lot of people are kind of saying the same thing as you. Martin potentially to the factory team, Marc to Pramac in that same kind of full factory ride, full factory contact, same as Martin. Great. I don't know. Marc's got this environment now that he in many ways controls. He runs that team. He's got, as you said, he's got his brother right next to him, so there's no headbutting with teammates. He goes to Pramac. He's got Morbidelli, who's this loose cannon. It seems like, in terms of things, he's not the happiest guy to be pitted next to. Why would you want to break up this? He did have a crash, Sven Grun. Sorry, Sven.
Yeah, on Friday. Yeah.
Okay. So, but I mean, this is Marc Marquez. He normally crashes 12 times on a Friday. So anyway, I loved it. I love how he celebrates with his team. I love how he's reinvented himself and he's fast and he's in this championship. 3 races ago, I wasn't that sure that he was going to be in this championship. He's in this championship. He's right in the mix. And that exercise is just going to get better and better. And in the sprint race on Saturday, who was the top Ducati? Marc Marquez.
Yeah.
On the old spec bike that he is still learning, that Franky Morbidelli is still learning the way I think that learning grace is maybe gone, but they'll still learn 1 or 2 things. You never stop learning. They'll still pick up things. And I think what Marc is loving at this point with Ducati is when he is struggling, like on a Friday or Saturday. When he was on the Honda, what did he do? He went and looked at Mia's data or brought, Now when he's struggling, he's looking at Martin, Pecco. He's looking at this race-winning, dominating data and going, okay. I mean, that's luxury he's never really had because he's been the benchmark. Now, I think I'm certainly enjoying him not being the benchmark and trying to get his way to the benchmark. And, Mariska Hutchinson, I love how Marc Marquez celebrated with the crowd on Sunday. Marc, as we know it, he's back. And it's a refreshing sight to see. I love the Pedro Acosta exercise. We'll talk about that later. I love all the sharks in the crowd and that. You're seeing all the Marc Marquez caps being dusted off and put back on, and they're coming out in full abundance because he's back and he's brought this energy back into MotoGP. Yeah, Pecco goes down and Martin's suffering, but hey, Marc Marquez is on the podium, so who cares? So I agree with you. In many ways, I could see him pushing to say, you know what, leave me where I am. And in many ways, you know what, if I'm a Nadia Padovani, I'd be saying, you're damn right. We gave you Bastianini. We've bought our bikes from you for how long? Now we're giving you Marc Marquez. No, there was nowhere else to put him. We took him in. We've given him the spot. We've given him this family environment. Di Giannantonio thrived there. We've given you Di Giannantonio. Where's our piece of the cake now? So, you know what? Yeah, I think they deserve to keep that exercise just with a couple of more benefits.
Well, Rob, obviously, Pramac and Gresini contracts are up now, end of this season. So surely Gresini are going to go to Ducati. They've kind of said, we're staying with Ducati. Well, they've said it. They just haven't signed anything yet. I think they're negotiating. Once this decision of the factory bike is made, and let's presume it's not Marc Marquez, I think Nadia is going to say, okay, we're quite happy, you happy. Instead of giving both the factory bikes to Pramac, where you're going to have Firmin Aldegar as a newbie and Franky Morbidelli, who, let's be quite honest, if he stays there at the end of the season, hasn't done too much yet on the factory spec bike. Give us one of those. That'll be in their contract, that as long as they've got Marc Marquez in their fold, they get a 2025, 2026 spec bike. I think that's going to be the negotiation that Gresini are having with Ducati. To me, that would make sense. Put Martin in the factory team, leave Marc where he is. It's a happy environment. One thing I've noticed with him, let's discard his qualifying on a Saturday, not getting into Q2. Very important. He knows it's a mistake. I'm going to go back to what you and I discussed after the last race. We said, Brad keeps saying, Brad Binder, on a Saturday to Sunday, we found something. But unfortunately, the results don't show it. Marquez says from Saturday to Sunday, we found something. And he goes, last weekend, 13th to 2nd. This weekend, 14th to 2nd and 3rd. And exactly what you say is looking at, if he is looking at the data from guys that are faster than him. He even said, I had to follow Pecco to see how he controls the tire. So so I just see a very mature Marc Marquez. Yes, I thought by now he would have won. I said by Mugello, so he's got to try and win this weekend. But still, he seems to have matured. And one thing I wanted to mention earlier when you were talking about turn 5, he, to me, seemed to be the slowest oak through that corner. Yeah. But I think what he was doing is making sure he didn't lose the front end. He was just running that wide, hit the apex, run wide out of the turn. But to me, he just looked slow there. And in my head, I just thought, all he's doing is making sure that that's a corner he's not comfortable with. He's not going to crash. So it cost him 0.2 a lap or whatever it was. But he made sure that he kept the bike upright. And to me, just seems to be a more mature way of riding. It's not the Marc Marquez. Yes, and I understand from after the injury till the end of last year, he was riding a bike that was uncompetitive. So he was riding at 110% and the bike could only deliver 70%. Now I think he's riding at 95% and the bike can deliver 100%. So I see he's going to get better. Remember, he got taken out by Pecco when they were running 3rd and 4th, and he crashed in the US when he was leading. Yeah. So, he's riding this championship, albeit that he lost those points. Pecco, obviously, in the crash, lost points too. But the point I'm trying to make is, to me, he's in this for the long haul. Whether it happens to be this year, which I still think he's going to factor closer to the end, but certainly next year, if they give him the full spec 2025 bike, he's going to be a dangerous man to race. Eh?
I love it. As Oli Moto said, Marc Marquez and Pedro Acosta have added more excitement to the championships this year. And I know it frustrates people that, the commentators talk about them all the time. But as you said, that's the talk of the town at the moment. Yeah. That's where all the talk is. So why wouldn't they focus on that? We'd love to see Brad Binder all the time in the spotlight. It's about who's performing on the day and on the weekends. And unfortunately, there's a talking point there, but it's not talking about race wins and consistency, which is what they need to find. So anyway, the Marc Marquez exercise, absolutely love it. Either way, I think he's going to be on a Ducati next year. What colors is still up in arms? I think the big question mark here, Marc is ideally placed either way. If he goes to Pramac, he's on a factory Ducati, great. If he stays in Gresini, the big talking point here is that question mark. Is Ducati brave enough to give Martin the boot, first of all? And second of all, are they brave enough to keep Martin in their factory team and deal with him and Pecco? Because Pecco came out on the weekend as well and said, who's your ideal teammate? Nea Bastianini. Why? Yeah. Because he can, he can do that. I've got a teammate next to me that's not going to, he'll threaten me every now and then, but I've got this guy under my thumb. You're not going to do that with Martin. It's not, they're all lovey-dovey now, and after the race talk about it's not going to happen. So I think that also speaks volumes for what's going on there. And
just how about this for a fly in the ointment? Marc Marquez to the factory Ducati and Jorge Martin to the Gresini Ducati to partner with Aleix Marquez. I think that would upset a few people, eh?
Yeah, you can imagine. But Martin's made it a fact that he wants a full factory.
No, I joke when I say that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. I was just thinking about the VR46 exercise after this year. We always said, don't go with Yamaha because you're thriving on Ducatis. I don't know. I would look at that now and maybe rethink that, especially with the 2027 rules changing. I know there's still the talk of Pramac, and this is where I think Gresini also deserve a bit more because they kind of slated those straight away. Pramac are kind of, as I said, holding Ducati by the balls. If I was VR46 at the moment, I'd be looking and going, you know what, let's go with that full factory support. Let's develop a bike. Our riders are still young. They're still good enough. let's give them a couple of years on Yamaha. Come 2027, we're on a great package, hopefully, and we can go thrive. So, I mean, that's a conversation. Well, we can actually start it now, because fourth place was Aleix Espargaro. We spoke about him. Fantastic weekend. He announced his retirement on the Thursday. Pole position, fastest ever lap around Catalunya, and I hope he gets to hold that for a very long time. Because the Catalan boy, it was written in the stars, and it was scripted. I don't know who writes the scripts, but that was brilliantly written. Again, won the sprint race, and he said, I couldn't believe the pace that these guys were going. They weren't going to last, and he was absolutely right. Sunday, I loved his race on Saturday, because when Marc got past him, I thought, Aleix is fading here. That Aleix, that I've retired, I've got 2 kids and a wife waiting for me in the pit, that Aleix could have easily just gone, you know what, 4th place it is. That guy dug deep. He did not have the bike and the pace underneath him to stay with Marc. And he clawed and he dug and he put those claws into the back of Marc, and he somehow held on, and he pushed Marc all the way to the end. And I love the mutual respect between both of them at the end, both having kind words to say to each other. But that's what I love about MotoGP, is that fierce rivalry and that fierce respect. And again, I tip my hat off to Aleix Espargaro, because he has no right being there at that age. You have announced your retirement, and you've got all these, I hate to say it, the Brad Binders, the Jack Millers. Okay, he crashed, but all these other Foss riders behind you. We'll talk about that. Don't worry, Paul. But all these Foster riders, including your Maverick Vinales, your much younger Foster teammate, and all these guys behind him. You know what? Kudos, Aleix Espargaro.
Yeah, absolutely. What you say is 100% spot on. In fact, when Marc passed him, I think it was about half a lap later, he had pulled just shy of half a second gap. I thought, that's it. Good. Now Marc's got no pressure. Man, at the end of the start straight, it was down to 1/10 of a second. And I think the most it got to for the remaining 3 laps or whatever it was is 2.5 tenths of a second. So he, exactly what you say, he put Marc under big pressure. Kudos to him. He could have just said, well, sorry, 4th is the best I'm going to get, which he still got. But he certainly made a full go. He made sure Marc was on it the whole way. One thing I can say for sure, Rob, that lap record's going to stay until this time next year. The way these bikes are, I mean, every lap, every track we go to now, new lap record, new lap record, new lap record. So I can't see it being there end of Catalunya weekend next weekend, but yeah, I enjoy your sentiment. Let's hope he keeps it. Definitely for 12 months it'll be his.
Yeah, I agree. Olimoto, we don't need to go on about that. We all know the amazing Valentino Rossi at 42, what he was doing, and he won his last race at 38, and that's in that same kind of environment with all these youngsters coming up. So yeah, those kind of guys, I tip my cap off to them, because it can't be an easy environment, especially being a husband and a father. And that's the difference between Aleix and Rossi. The only major difference I can really say where I take my cap off to Aleix a little bit more is juggling that responsibility within that network. Mariska, sorry to your 10-year-old. Baha, my 10-year-old son just heard Rob say Pramac is holding Ducati by the bottom area, and he looked at me and said, I hope that is just a figure of speech. Yes, it is just a figure of speech, Mariska's 10-year-old boy. I'm sorry, we'll keep it neat and tidy from here onwards. 5th place, DJ Antonio, Paul, and I wasn't too impressed with DG heading into the weekend, because he came out and said, why is Ducati not looking at me? And he kind of made 1 or 2 comments where I went, no, Fabio, don't do that. Just do your thing. Don't Marc's not this alien anymore. Fabio, don't do that. Don't ruin it now. Just do your thing. Let your riding on the track do it. And then, I mean, he looked really good all weekend. He was setting fast times early, and then, others would catch him. But again, it was a really good exercise for Fabio Di Gianantonio this weekend. He's flying the flag for that VR46 team when he shouldn't be. It should be Bezzecchi, but he's doing it. And again, as I just said now, I look at it and I go, how upset would a DJ and Bezzecchi be if they went, right, we're going factory Yamaha next year in preparation for 2027, but it's more money, it's more resources, it's a bit more, or do we carry on this exercise where Digi came out afterwards and said, yeah, it's a great result and I love it, but I'm having to ride the wheels off this older bike to stay with these GP25s. Yes, Marc's in the same problem, but Marc's a different kettle of fish. Let's just put it that way. But again, DJ Antonio, I know you rate him and you're going to tell me again. No, you said it a while ago that he deserves more, and he's getting the job done. He really is getting the job done.
Yeah, the question I wanted to ask, but you've kind of just answered that, was, has anybody on the show ever said that they think this kid is quite good? So I don't know. I might have mentioned it.
They have, yeah.
Yeah.
There's been people that have agreed with you, but it's the Digi is not just with our show and all the people that we have here, but I think in general, there's this fence. There's this people
Yeah.
that like you that believe there's a lot more and they see a lot more there, and then there's people that don't. And I'm still on that fence, a bit more on that side now because he has proved himself, and you've got to give him kudos for that. I don't know.
So the comment he made about, why aren't Ducati looking at me? I think it's a fair comment, because last year Ducati was certainly looking at his teammate. I mean, his teammate finished third in the championship. So yes, certainly better than he did, but he was the best Ducati rider at the end of the year on an older bike last year. So I think it's right for him to say that to a point. You've been saying this guy can't have a once-off good weekend and then nothing. So maybe that belief that we've discussed is now in him. And he says, Marc is no longer an alien and I'm as good. So maybe that belief is now settling in his head that he knows he can do what he has to do. So possibly his comments came from that point of view. Maybe not arrogance, maybe a little bit of self-belief or self-confidence coming out that he didn't have middle of last year. I don't know. I agree with you. When I heard that, I thought about it and I thought, no, but maybe, this guy is now performing exceptionally well on an older bike. If you compare him to Alex Marquez and his teammate should be the glory boy of that team. And he's done nothing. In fact, he's now turned around and said he actually might be regretting his decision to stay in the team. So now that to me is a direct, I don't want to say a slap in the face. It was his choice. Yeah. You know that. I know we've discussed it. He decided to stay where he could have gone to Pramac. Now he's saying, Bezecchi is saying, I don't know if that was such a great thing. I've got to steer this bike. I can't get it to turn. I haven't heard the Gian Antonio complaining. So just something to bear in mind. I think mentally he's moved a step ahead of where he was. So he's feeling more confident in that. His results are allowing him to say, but why aren't Ducati looking at me? And in all fairness, they shouldn't be looking at him. They've got 3 of the top riders in the world to squabble about, worry about them. But I'm glad his mindset is what you said last year. Don't do this once in a season. And he's showing us he's become very consistent. So, yes and no. I hope he said it out of, hey, don't forget about me. I'm at the back of the class here, kid, as opposed to being arrogant and, I can beat anyone. He hasn't yet, but certainly I think he's definitely pricked Ducati's attention. There's no doubt. And as we've said, from not having a ride to now being, I'm going to say VR46s, we favor this guy a little bit more, So big kudos to him. He's put his, those things down there on the line, and it's working. Hey? So I love the kid, and I just think there's something about him that I've seen him at Mugello. He just seems like such a normal, wants to ride his bike, have a jaw kind of kid, and that's what I like about him, and I think he's supremely talented.
Yeah, it's kind of like what Little Big Media Co says, and this is where you do have to pat him on the back. He came into MotoGP. I was kind of like, well, did he do enough to come into MotoGP? No, but he certainly has proved himself. He went through a hard stage. Remember, not last year, the year before, or just after that Mugello pole position, or just before, he came out with, saying, I'm depressed, I'm suffering mentally, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. So he went through a real big dip in his career and his life. And he's really pulled himself out of it. And I also love the Digi exercise. I love his social media. He's smiley. He's happy. He gives us an insight into his world. And I'm loving the Digi exercise. And you do got to give him a pat on the back and say, you know what? At one stage, he wasn't MotoGP ready or MotoGP worthy. And he certainly has made himself now. So, yeah, I think it's brilliant. And thank goodness VR46 were forced in many ways into that decision to having to take him. Behind him, 6th place, Raul Fernandez, the best version of Raul Fernandez we have seen on a MotoGP bike since he came into the championship. Saturday, devastated. What a start. Some of those moves that he was pulling in that chicane, you go right, left, and then right again. He was shoving it on the inside there. He got out front, and you were kind of going, okay, well, again, lighty tires, there's these rules of MotoGP that you've got to abide by. And when he went down, you did, I'm not the biggest Raul Fernandez fan in the world, but I did. My heart bled for him when he went down. The team as well, because you want that, it's that underdog team. Brivio, you could see Brivio and the disappointment on the team's face. But anyway, Raul Fernandez certainly put up a much better showing of himself this weekend. Kind of exactly like the DG exercise. Are you MotoGP worthy? Well, not until you prove to us you are. This weekend proved that he can be second best Aprilia.
Yeah, certainly. And he looked the part. When they did show him, he looked confident. He looked like he was ready for the weekend. Pity about the crash. Exactly what you say. He got that gap. He immediately pulled a gap. He should have just calmed down a fraction. But maybe it's also, you're in the moment, those guys aren't going to let you just run away with it. So you have to keep 102.5% where you should have dialed it back to 100%. But yeah, also not the biggest Raul Fernandez fan, but I was gutted for the poor oak. But that's racing, eh? And then Sunday, he was okay. Said he had tire drop-off, same as most other people, and then he just managed it. What impressed me about the Gian Antonio, he had a 1 second gap to close on Fernandez on the last lap. I thought, well, he'll close the gap. Well, lo and behold, he went and passed him. So anyway, but yeah, nice to see a good weekend for Fernandez, but he's not quite yet at the point where I think he should have been long ago, because the Aprilia's up to it. He just hasn't proved that yet. But yeah, not a bad weekend.
Paul, one thing he is doing, though, as Wayne Taylor says, Raul is slowly starting to outshine Oliveira. And let's remember, Oliveira's on the full factory spec bike. Raul's not. So, look, we'll talk about Oliveira in a couple of positions' time, because he's a little bit further back. Behind Ralph and Alex Marquez. Now, not much to talk about Alex here, but one thing that did spark me this weekend with the whole Gresini, that I looked at the bigger picture and I went, Bastianini won and did well on a Gresini bike, promoted to the factory team. Digi, toward the end of last year, started doing well on a Gresini bike. This is Alex's third season.
Second year with them.
Second year with Gresini. And we've seen glimpses, but, I told you I was worried about him getting outshone. I agree with you now. The more I look at it, that he's just happy to be there. And, you know what, bigger brother, you're faster, you're better. You go. I'm riding my MotoGP bike. I'm happy. Yay. I just, at what point does Alex have to prove something to us? Yes, I know he's got the Marquez surname, but at what point it's like, okay, well, it's nice having you there finishing 7th, 8th. You crash quite, you tend to put it in the weeds. We get the odd decent performance from you, but I don't know. So far, we haven't seen that really. So at what point do you go, okay, Alex, you got to start justifying as a rider why you're here, not as your surname and the money that you bring in, but as a rider that you fit in this championship. Yeah, 7th place at a tricky circuit, great, but we've got to take into consideration some of the DNFs and blah, 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 blah. But, is Alex Marquez this far in his MotoGP career in a great team, on a great bike, 7th, being beaten by Digi and Raul Fernandez? I don't know.
Yeah, I agree with you. He certainly deserves to be in MotoGP. Does he deserve to be on a Ducati? That's the question. Yeah. The only Ducati that's still behind him in the points at the moment is Morbidelli. And he's also hasn't set the world alight, not for many seasons, not since that season on the Yamaha where he finished second in the championship. Since then, that seems to have been his highlight, and nothing's gone right or worked out or whatever. So, yeah, Alex Marquez, a very good question. You know what he's doing? By being in the team with his brother, that all the focus is taken away from him. So he actually, no one's saying, oh, does he deserve his ride? Why is he there? They're just saying what's going to happen to his brother. Yeah. So he's kind of flying under the radar, and thanks to his brother, we knew what was going to happen. There was no doubt Marc was going to beat him. But he hasn't got the results. Last year, he was way better. I mean, did he finish podium too? I think he even won a sprint race, was qualified way better. But I also think this year, the competitiveness of the whole field has moved up a notch, and maybe he's only moved up half a notch. Yes. So I think he is riding on the Marquez name, but he's flying so far under the radar that there's no talk of him not having a ride. And does he deserve a Ducati? Should he not be making up a Yamaha place or a Nakagami or a whoever on the Honda? I don't know. So I think at the moment, his name is, I mean, don't discount the fact he's a 2 times world champion. So he deserves to be in MotoGP. But does he deserve the bike he's on? You know, that's the question. There is no answer to it, but he's very blessed that his brother is, and it could have been someone else, but it's his brother who's his teammate, taking all the focus off of him. So as long as he doesn't crash and finish stone last, he's actually going to be okay.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there, actually. He's just flying under the radar. Mariska just said as well, you kind of forget about Alex. You got to look at it twice because he doesn't get a lot of coverage. He's not mentioned that much. We talk about Brad and them not being mentioned. Geez, Alex just actually doesn't exist until you see him on the results. So yeah, I agree with you. He definitely deserves to be in MotoGP, but yeah, on that bike, yeah, we're gonna have to wait and see what happens with that exercise, and if he does find his kind of own spotlight again, or if he's just going to go, well, that's it. I've just got to fly under this radar and just fly under my brother's shadow. Let's see. Now, Paul, are you strapped in? Are you strapped in? Because in eighth place, and this is going to be a big discussion. Everybody have a sip of water, have your Mari biscuit, which we don't get here in the UK.
Comments.
Have your comments. Have your Comprol, have your Panado, call the GP, do whatever, because in eighth place is Brad Binder. And I mean, where do we start with this? Friday, yes, the pace was there, and he showed good pace, but he crashed. He crashed. And the more you keep crashing, you know what? I looked after the weekend, especially after Friday. I went, and I've been there. Not at the level Brad is, I know that, but I've been there as a racer. You kind of start going, what's going on? Am I getting out the bed the wrong side? Am I brushing my teeth the wrong way? Am I putting the left boot on instead of the right boot first? You start picking up these little things. Am I eating with the wrong knife and fork? And this starts playing on your mind. Yeah, it does, because, and Brad said it coming into the weekend, it's been chaos. We have been chaos. Getting yourself out of chaos, it's not the easiest thing in the world to do. It's kind of when the chaos wants to let go of you is when it happens. You cannot get yourself out of that chaos. And this is where Brad and KTM are at the moment, and that factory KTM team. We talk about Acosta putting pressure on Brad. And then remember, this is, yes, it's the same spec bike and it's a factory back team, but this is like, Man City B team outperforming Man City A team. From
Absolutely.
The technicians to the everyone. So not just Brad, it's Brad's team. It's the gas team. The gas team, the B team, is outperforming the A team. And this has to come with pressure. I don't care what anyone says. We know Brad is the most headstrong person on the planet. It has to affect you, especially like this, where you're crashing and you're going, but why?
Why?
But why? And this is the worrying thing for me, is that there's this why. And I still posted it on the Motor Rider World post on Sunday. Yeah, it was good that he could stay on the bike and finish eighth. Kudos to him, while all this chaos was going around him, and Pedro crashed and the bike wasn't there, and the front tire, there were these problems. He brought it home in eighth. Great play. Well done. Points. He stayed on while the others didn't. Fernandez, Miller, Acosta crashed. But we left another weekend with more questions than answers. And this is the big problem. And how do we fix this? Is it just a case of, do we wait until the luck turns? Or what do KTM and Brad, as a team and a rider, what do they do to fix this?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, after Sunday, Brad said on Saturday when he did crash, he had a warning before that. He knew the front was not great, but he ignored it. So whether it was tire pressure or just a lack of grip, and he said that, he owns the problem. He doesn't, which is he owning the problem because he doesn't want to say, listen, there's a problem with this bike. What are we going to do? Or is he just being Brad and saying, no, I made the mistake. None of my technicians are riding the bike. I'm riding it. But he did say he ignored that. So on Sunday, when it started doing the same thing, he backed off because he said, I'm not prepared to crash. But Rob, I want to read you something. This is what I picked up on the internet. And this is from Pedro Acosta after Sunday's race. We have a problem with the front part of the bike. It's not so clear at the moment. And it's not about the tires. That's from Pedro Acosta.
Hmm.
Now, I've been singing this terrible song for a while now. It's their suspension. And when I say that, I'm saying that's a part of the problem. That's from Pedro Acosta. Go on to crash.net, or I think it was on crash.net, the quote from him. He said we have a problem with the front of the bike. Now, is it a weight distribution? Is it a length? Do they need to drop the forks, raise the forks, different triple clamps? I don't know. He wasn't specific. But to me, you never hear any other manufacturer, rider saying, listen, we've got a problem with the front of the bike. So I don't know. I've still got that problem that I think they need to address. To me, it's critical. Every time you see them crash, every time it's a front end. Yeah, okay, Brad's. I don't actually know what happened. You as a racer could probably explain it better through that chicane where, did he just turn too aggressively? The front seemed to slide a bit, and then it gripped and it kind of high-sided the front end of the bike, if that makes sense.
Yep.
But to me, just reading what Pedro Acosta said, it just, to me, I don't know why KTM are being so dogmatic about it. But Brad as a whole, like I said earlier, Marc says we found a solution from Saturday to Sunday. The result shows.
Yeah.
Brad keeps saying we found something. The result doesn't show. And no disrespect to him. He's fantastic. I've said it before. I rate him as top 3 riders on that grid. But at the moment, he's certainly not deserved of that. Not at all. And exactly what you say, Rob. Now it's playing on his head. And also, Brad's never crashed this much. I mean, we used to joke about Marquez. I think KTM are taking extra fairings now. It must play on his mind too. Why? Every time he has to put in super fast laps, which you've got to do now, he seems to crash. And I mean, to then go out on the next lap, crash again. His head also has to start as you say, we change this, we try that, put the left boot on instead of, what do they do?
A lot of people agreeing with you on the comments here. Paul W. People suspension. A lot of people have been saying it for a long time as well. That the KTM just need to bite the bullet and go with it. A lot of people saying exactly what you're saying. Front end. That you can see the front end problems there. Pedro Acosta coming out and saying it. Honestly, I made mention to it earlier. I really focus on Pedro Acosta's riding style now and Brad's, and you can see Brad's just trying to keep just trying to ride this KTM as fast as he can within its limits. So you can see him going into some corners so tentatively. There's a picture that I'll try and post after this to show what I mean. There's a picture of them going through a left-hander. Pecco, all the Ducati riders, including Pedro Acosta, got their shoulder right over the inside curb on the line, and Brad's that, half a meter off. And if you really analyze, and I watched every single session, there's that after turn 5, you come through that fast left down the hill into that very tight chicane. Brad could never hit that inside curb. That final turn, that final right-hander, Pedro Acosta, you talk about Martin scraping his shoulder there. Pedro Acosta was scraping his shoulder and everything in that final turn. Photographer just can't get there to get close enough to see it. Brad was always half a meter away from that. He just cannot get that bike in there because he doesn't trust it. As you said, I think he gets to a point, and it's also his riding style. I think the rear is loose and loads the front a bit, but Brad gets to a point where he goes, I can't turn this bike anymore. If I turn this bike, I'm worried it's going to fold. And I was watching Brad this weekend, and normally you get this carefree Brad that can push over those limits and just dig in and get it done. This weekend, there was this Brad going, you know what? I don't know what to do with this bike anymore. I do not trust this motorcycle anymore. And as I said, if you watched Pedro, I know he complains about the front end. Pedro was riding lines that Pecco and them couldn't ride, and he was making that turn. He would pass into turn 1. You thought, that's very cute, Pedro. You're not going to make that turn. Bang, bang, bang. Yeah. There's no versatility in that bike of Brad's. Through that chicane, it looks like a tank just here. Pedro went bang, 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 bang. Pedro's crash in Le Mans was because he was almost going to take out Aleix, so he pulled a bit more front, down he went. Rookie mistake. He went in too fast. It had nothing really to do with a bad setup front. He still said, I had the pace to go win that race. His crash on Sunday for me was, right, Pedro, you've got to now learn there are these rules in MotoGP. Your front tire is going to heat up And this is his front tire went up there, and he didn't have the same kind of grip, because before that he was putting that bike exactly where he wanted it, exactly. And he could ride in the middle of the circuit. He doesn't have to do these wide. He can ride in the middle of the circuit, and he made that track so short. He was curb on the inside, hugging every curb. And I've said it for my whole life: a short track is a fast track. And that's what Pedro was doing. Brad was doing these wide sweeping lines, going in sideways, turn 10, bringing it in. But that just means you're on the brake longer, you're turning it. And if you're not trusting your front end, you can't do that. So what worried me, again, I say it again, is I watched a Brad that had no faith in his bike. It said on Sunday, after 6 laps, my front tire was done. And this was Brad not overriding. You could see he was riding to preserve the first couple of laps. So you're riding to preserve and you still don't make it. 6 laps. 6 laps. Jack Miller's throwing it down the weeds again. Augusto Fernandez is crashing out of 18th, or I think he was 12th or 11th or whatever play. He was actually quite high up again. Pedro Acosta's crashing again. You can imagine Brad sitting there going, you know what, bugger this. I cannot crash another bike. First of all, for the cost of it and everything, but for myself, I cannot land up in the bushes again. And so this is now getting in the way. Brad's not going, I'm going to ride this thing as hard and fast as I can. Pecco goes, Saturday I crashed in turn 5. Sunday I'm going to pass Martin with 4 laps to go. I'm going to load the front and trust my bike to go in there. That's the difference at the moment. Is it suspension? I'm starting to think so, especially because of what's happening in Moto2. I think it's highlighting that WP is just that step behind. And as you said, the data, we've said it time and time again, the data that the Öhlins guys can pull from, and they can blah, blah, blah. Brad can only match himself to Pedro and Jack. And yeah, so the problem is, when do you start finding answers for these? The frustrating part for Brad and his team and KTM, though, this was supposed to be the year. This was supposed to be the year. We were supposed to be talking about Brad now, still in the hunt for a championship. And instead we're talking about him hoping to get top 10s.
Yeah.
It's so frustrating.
So it also shows, because remember, the tire compounds have changed from last year to this year. So that shows that they had adapted their suspension to work last year. This year they're just struggling to get it. Whether the carcasses, I know they're harder. So whether that finer stroke on the suspension is just that little hair off compared to what the Öhlins can compensate for, because that's all it can be, Rob, in my mind. The setup of the bike, the length, dropping the forks, changing the triple clamps, more rigid, less rigid, that they should sort out in a heartbeat. That, in fact, should be Danny's job, off the track at testing. So I don't believe it's got anything to do with that. It's when you need that compensation on the when the bike's at maximum lean angle, or you want it to be there, and know that even though the carcass of the tire is a little bit harder, you've got the suspension to absorb the little bit of absorption that the tire is no longer giving you. I don't know if it's got anything to do with that. That's my thinking, and I'm not an engineer by any manner of means. I just think I think it's a part of the problem. What you say about Brad having no confidence, well, that's shining through more and more. And you know what it's like. When you've got no confidence, you've got to build the confidence first before you can get back to where you were. And last year, Brad just looked like a rider who could almost do anything with the bike. And this year, he's definitely so tentative, because every time he pushes the front, he crashes. And unfortunately, the modern MotoGP bike, with all the aerodynamics, a lot more stress is placed on the front of the bike going into the corners. So I think it's a combination, but I just don't know. But it must be weighing on them terribly, that from being so competitive almost every weekend last year, yes, they started great this year. They had 2 second places from Brad in Qatar. But since then, the wheels have kind of just fallen off the KTM bus pretty rapidly. And I don't believe for a second that they want to start now changing everything to suit Pedro Acosta's riding style. It's completely different to Brad. But you're certainly the issues. What are the issues? It would be, once again, interesting to be a fly on the wall and hear what their chats are going forward, because they need to do something. They suddenly, we've discussed it. Now they are definitely the 3rd best bike on the grid. Now it's not even questionable.
Well, Sven makes a good point. I used the analogy of Man City A and Man City B, and he said, you think about that, you use that. If Man City B is outperforming Man City A, what happens? Changes are made. Coaches are sacked, personnel sacked, new players and whatever. So as you said, does something need to change like that? I've got two questions I want to pose to you, Paul, that has been asked by followers here. The first one from Jenny Blake, and it's one that we've asked before and we kind of dismissed straight away, but you're going to got to look at it a bit more now because of the severe drop. Why did KTM bike perform so well in the first two rounds? So why did we have this Brad challenging at Qatar and Pedro challenging at Qatar 2 seconds? Right, this is it. The season's going well. And I think it was last week or the week before I mentioned, was it a case of maybe the other riders and teams, the Marks, everyone else's, were still finding their feet and weren't, Brad and KTM just hit the ground running a lot faster, because now there's a little bit of justification in that, because has everyone just caught up, and that's applied the pressure to KTM, and that's why they can't keep up in many ways. So how do you play out that? Why did they perform then and why aren't they now?
Okay, first of all, I'd like to know how much of an effect track temperature has on the tires, because remember, Qatar is a night race. So what are we running track temperature there? I can't remember. I think it was in the low 20s. We're now running track temperatures as an average, now that we're in Europe, probably late 30s, early 40s track temperature. So that affects the bike when you're running in the slipstream. We know that. We know there's tire pressures that need to be adhered to. So going back to Qatar, was that something that didn't factor to the KTM because they didn't have to worry about it? The tire temperature and their bike just gelled. I don't know if that's a factor. Then we moved on to Portimao, where we saw Pedro Acosta, who had run fantastically. He was great in Qatar, but remember, then he used up his tires. Portimao, he had learned how to control the tire. He gave Brad a bit of a hiding there. Did that start to play on Brad's mind? Did that start to play on Brad's team's mind that, okay, now we need to look at his data? So now they're going and looking at everything he's done and changing accordingly, as opposed to listening to Brad Binder. My honest opinion would be, I can't see that happening. But now it's been 6 races in, and kind of 6 out of 6, okay, take Qatar out of the equation, 5 out of 6, Pedro's been faster than Brad from the get-go. So now are they putting the focus on Man City B team and their staff as opposed to the A team? We'll never know the answers to those questions. But I think it's getting in everybody's head. So now they just don't know which way they're going. Like you say, Rob, they look lost. So have they tried Pedro's setup? Doesn't work for Brad. Gone back to Brad's setup, and now that's not work. I don't know. It's just it's such an unanswerable question without being the fly on the wall to listen. So, but I do think Qatar, I do think they got a jump on everyone, and I've questioned whether the cooler conditions had anything to do with it. Just a guess. It's just surmising. I don't know.
So speaking to AJ Fenton the other night when I did the chat with him, and one factor we cannot overlook in all of this is that it's not through lack of trying. Kudos to the team. Brad crashed that bike on Friday. They fixed it. They got it ready for him to go out. Remember, he crashed both bikes. They gave him that opportunity to qualify well. He crashes. They try. They go out. So it's not through a lack of effort. That's one thing we can dismiss. It's not through a lack of effort. But Paul, my next question to you now, and it's from Oli Moto, and it's one we actually got to start seriously considering. And in many ways, I don't know if Brad's even considering it or thinking about it, because the Marc exercise has certainly proven that it's the way to go. If Binder could somehow get a satellite Ducati ride next season on GP24, he would be better off than a KTM. Acosta is their future now. So the question here is, does Brad go, okay, there's a couple of more years before we go 2027 rules. By then, I'm however old. Brad's going to be 32, 33, whatever. I don't know. So I've got this little window where Ducati's the bike to be on. Finish and clear. Ducati is the bike to be on. And there's some available. Do I do a Marc Marquez and say, right, tear up this big factory contract. It's not about the money anymore. I want to go perform. I have given my heart and soul. Maybe my time with the team has run its course. They've got Pedro Acosta now. Pedro is their future. Pedro is their blue-eyed boy. You know what? Kudos to Pedro. He deserves it because you know what? Pedro hasn't come in there. He doesn't have a better bike than Brad. He doesn't have better tires than Brad. You get these talented riders that come in and he's making it work. Yeah, okay, he crashed again. We cannot overlook that, but he's a rookie. The pace is there. He's going to get it sorted and he's going to flourish. But does he go right? You know what, Pedro? You have these problems. You have these WP problems. You have these front tire problems. I'm tired now. I'm tired. Thank you, KTM. Thank you so much for everything. You'll always be a big place in my heart, but I need to get results now. There's your big money contract. Cressini, Alex's ride, or Pramac, or I don't know, wherever. Take me. And let me see. In a way, I want it to happen because if you look at Marc always said, this is going to be a tell. It's either going to go this way, which it's doing, or that's it. That's me done. Does Brad need that kind of reflection time to go, well, is it me or is it the bike? There's no doubt it's the bike. Brad is better than this. But we can say that till we blue in the face. The results aren't showing it. Me saying it and us fans saying it means nothing. So and everyone in the comments, I'll try and catch up with the comments. But what do we all feel of this? Do we now feel that you know what, Brad, you've given great time to KTM for yourself, for your reflection, to see where you truly are as a rider. You've got to now make that move.
Okay, Rob, so a couple of things. First of all, me personally, when Brad signed that multi-year deal with KTM, I was very disappointed because already he had outshone the bike at that point, and that's going back 2 seasons. I just felt that he should have signed a 2-year deal, which would have ended the end of this year like everybody else, and then he would have been on the open market. I was disappointed because I honestly don't believe that KTM is a championship winning bike. It's proved it this year once again because already they're too far behind to try and win the championship. So that's my opinion. A couple of questions we got to ask ourselves. Is Brad in this championship for the money or to win a world championship? And I can tell you right now, the answer would be you can take all the cash away, but tell him he'll be world champion. He'll sign in a heartbeat because he wants to be world champion. The money is an aside, yeah, and they earn good money. So well done to them. So my thinking would be if the opportunity arose, and how's this for throwing a spanner in the work? Why doesn't he go and chat to Alex Marquez and say, listen, why don't you and I come to an agreement? You jump on the KTM or whatever you want and give me your bike. We'll tear up that little KTM contract and they can have a hissy fit. I don't really care. I jest when I say that. But to me, he's at a point where, like with Marc was loyal to a fault with Honda. Nearly cost him his career. Okay, that was 100% his fault. But then he battled through 4 years on a bike that was uncompetitive that nearly finished him. He then made the choice. Had he got to the end of that relationship? Yes. And I think Brad would do him no harm whatsoever that if there was an out clause in his contract somehow, if he could work that, I'd love to see that guy on a Ducati. I even think, like with Marc, put him on a year-old bike. He'll still be better than Alex, De Gian, Antonio, Bezzecchi, Morbidelli. So he'd only be racing with Marc Marquez, Pecco, and Jorge Martin. That's my opinion. I do believe he has the talent, he has the ability, he's shown it. If it's going to happen or not, I think he's loyal to KTM too much. I don't even think he would consider it. Maybe we're wrong. Maybe it is something that is now starting to feature in his thinking. I can't see it happening, but me personally, I would love to see it happen. I really would. I think that relationship is done. We've discussed that Pedro Acosta is definitely the new boy on the block, and well done to him. And he'll move them as Brad moved them when it was him and Paul. He's moved them to where they are now. Pedro will move them forward. I think Brad needs to, if that option ever arose, I would snatch it with both hands.
So before we get into a couple of the concerning comments and the concerning thoughts around that, I just want to answer this question here from Gary Kaiser. I'm sorry, I don't see how Pedro is outperforming Brad. In quali, yes, but it's too early to make that assumption. Take Jerez, 3 crashes out, and they are even. So Gary, I'm not saying Pedro is outperforming Brad. He's ahead of him in the championship. Again, the stats don't lie. No matter how much we think and how loyal we are and how much we love him, the stats do not lie. I'm looking at the riding. I'm looking at the actual riding, and I see Pedro on that bike an easier exercise. Yes, there's been the rookie crashes and stuff that he's going to, but I see him riding that bike and getting more out of it in a better way than what Brad is. And that's the frustrating thing for me. I see Pedro performing better on that bike than Brad at the moment. There's still a long way in this championship. There's still going to be weekends where Brad's going to shine on that KTM and we're going to forget all about this. But then there's going to be these weekends where it's the other way. The problem is, as you said, Paul, Jerez Brad kind of hit the ground running, excuse the pun. But he was faster than Pedro lap time was, but he was crashing 3 times doing this and wrecking bikes. Pedro at Le Mans went straight away and was almost faster than Brad on the Friday at a track he had never been to on a MotoGP bike. We forget this Pedro is still 6 races into his MotoGP career. 6. Yes, he's not this, someone posted that we can't keep saying this rookie sensation, but he is. He's shown such a maturity and such talent that we forget that this kid is a rookie. Okay, so that's how I'm looking at it. I'm not saying that he's outperforming Brad, that he's a better rider than Brad. I'm just saying him on that bike looks like he's able to ride it in a better way. I think Brad's outriding the KTM, and they can't find an answer for it to fit the way Brad wants to ride it. So that's just kind of what I'm saying, and I think Pedro is going to sort that out a bit faster than Brad, and he has in many ways already. But I just think Pit Bar's already come out and said he's our Superman. So yeah, Brad is still loved by KTM. He's still massive there, and they would still love to have him. Whether he's going to be in the gas team, which I don't think in at this point in time is not a demotion. It's level playing field. It's if Brad's in gas colors next year, would I be massively upset? I won't be, to be honest. He'll be on a bike that's beating him now. So what's the difference? But KTM's future, as Oli Motor said, is Pedro Acosta. So you know what, Brad, go find your own future now. That's what I'm saying. But it's a lot easier said than done, Paul. Now here's 2 comments that came up that concern me with this whole thing, because 2 years ago, Brad could have walked into any team. Brad had contracts flying in left, right, and center. Is that the case now? Wayne Taylor, I think Brad's pool is dwindling, to be honest, for him to attract another team, decent team that is. Oli Moto feels like now or never for Binder if he's going to make a move and chase the guys at the front. Bagnaia, Marquez, Aldeguer, Bezzecchi, Digi, and how many others want those Ducati? Yeah, we're saying, oh yeah, Brad, go to Ducati. Woohoo, yeah. It's not that simple. And that's what, has he left it too late?
Yeah, it's not that simple, but he's certainly one of the sought-after riders. And if there was any possibility of another team getting him, he would certainly be on their shopping list. I have no doubt about that. Mm-hmm. But he's not. There's absolutely no talk about Brad Binder. So certainly, if any approaches, negotiations have gone through his agent, they would have known straight away, from whether it's from KTM or from Bob Moore, who's his agent, saying, we have a watertight contract here. Mm-hmm. There is no negotiation. So, I don't think the relationship has broken down to a point. I don't think it's broken down at all, to be quite honest. But with Marc and Honda, over time, that relationship deteriorated. But Marc had he had given them 6 world championships. He had given them almost his career. Oh, wow. He then had a negotiating point as an exit strategy. Brad doesn't quite have that. He's won 3 races. He hasn't won a championship for them. I don't think he's got quite the same negotiating pull of a Marc Marquez. I just think that his contract, one way or the other, whether it's through him and his agent or through KTM, is watertight. And that's why no one even mentions his name. So it's almost a moot point that we are debating, would he or wouldn't he. The head thinking is, me personally, I'd love to see him move, take Alex Marquez's ride, Bezecchi's ride, Morbidelli's ride. They're 3 oaks that he'll drill on any given day. He's beating them anyway. Put him on that Ducati and let's see. Let's see if it's the same exercise as Marc Marquez. But it's not going to happen because his name doesn't get bandied around at all. I mean, you even hear talk of Jean Mir going somewhere else. He's second last in the championship. Brad's name is never mentioned. The only mention also of his teammate is a demotion. So I think their contracts are so tightly tied up that everyone knows, keep your hands off. There's no chance that we can do anything with this. So I think that's part of the problem. From which side, we don't know. Is it from the rider or from the manufacturer that contract is so watertight? I don't know.
Yeah, but at the same time, KTM, what are their real options? Okay, if we get Martin, great. Martin, Pedro, factory team, Brad, and Jack, gas team. But if they don't get Martin, they've got to almost, in a way, deal with the 4 riders that they got, because even who do you replace Fernandez with?
Well, I think the only option would be a Jean Mir.
Oh, geez, but
and that's just moving riders around. You're not going to gain. You're not going to gain much. But I think that's the only thing. So the reality is that I'm not saying KTM are stuck with Brad or Brad's stuck with KTM. Yes. That's his choice, and Brad will give it 100%, absolutely no doubt. But there also comes that point where, like with Marc, he's got to a point where he was just fed up with that Honda. He tried as hard as he could on a Friday till he had crashed and they had no more spare fairings, kind of. And then he'll just say, okay, well, I'll ride around in 15th place. And I hope it never gets to that point with Brad. I don't think it will, but that's the reality. So Brad, no matter what, for next season and the year after, has a factory bike, whether it's a KTM or a gas. I'm almost going to say he's irrelevant. His contract is secured.
So Ainsley Douglas Twig makes a very good point, and this is exactly how I see it when I watch Pedro Acosta. Pedro is breaking in a straighter line and turning later and tighter. Brad loves a sweeping line, and it seems like the KTM does not like that. Pedro's style is a better current fit to the setup, and that's exactly when I say the Pedro exercise just looks more suited to that bike at the moment. There was another comment here that I wanted to read. Donnie McCall, and this is something that you've got to factor in as well. Could this be playing a part? Isn't KTM starting to develop the bike to suit a Pedro rather than giving Brad a bike to be competitive on? Like you said, are they getting confused now with KTM going, right, Pedro's making it work. Look, go more with that angle, go more in that direction. I don't think so. Here's a comment. So now in the situation, we've got the devil and, your angel. Spengren is always this like voice of reason, the angel. And he says, yeah, and it's a very good thing to think. We're just saying jump ship and go, yay. Too risky to change now with the new rules in 2027. I have a feeling KTM 800cc engine will be strong, and reason why they also pushed the reduction in CC. Now, Sven, you've kind of sparked me and gone, oh, yeah, geez, you know what? Play it safe and stay there because it's a whole new ball game and you might not get anything better. So, it's a fresh start. Great. But on the flip side of that, you just said the 800cc engine will be fast and strong. Great. There's nothing wrong with the engine at the moment. That KTM is the fastest bike on that grid at the moment. It's faster than a Ducati. Pedro, especially, could pass whoever he wanted down that straight. Also because he was coming out that last turn, as I said, making that turn tighter, elbow, shoulder, right over that inside curb, coming out beautifully. Okay, nothing wrong with that. The problem, Sven, is, and I understand what you're saying, and in many ways I agree with you, take that safe option and see, because you might not get a better contract. Okay, you also got to look at the contract. Yes, there's a well-being of a rider. Marc's made a lot more money than Brad. Can Brad do without, a good contract? So it's not just a case of a rider, it's a contract Brad's got to look at. The problem with that, Sven, is they're still going to be on WP suspension. And that is the big question mark. How many MotoGP World Championships has Öhlins won? And how many have WP won? And that you can't argue with that at the moment. So yes and no. And as Olimoto said, does Brad make the move now while there's still a possibility of it? Because in a year's time, or even it could even be over now. The Brad's chances of moving to a Ducati could even be over now. We don't know.
Yeah, Rob, and something else that you mentioned just a minute ago, with Pedro Acosta riding those tighter lines, one thing Marc Marquez has done, which he said was very difficult, he's adapted his style to the Ducati. So does Brad not need to adapt his style to be a little bit more similar to what Pedro's doing? I'm just asking a question. I'm not saying that's what he must do. But Mark, so now Brad jumps ship to a Ducati. Will he be able to adapt? Because maybe part of the problem now is that he's not adapting to what he should be in terms of being similar to Pedro Acosta. And we're just using Acosta because he's the only reference of a KTM that's faster than Brad.
Yeah.
But if he now jumps ship across to a Ducati, he's got to make changes. Mark said the hardest thing for him was to stop trying to ride and Pecco told him, stop riding the Ducati like a Honda. And I think that's one thing which now we don't notice because he's adapted, but he's still making those little adjustments week in and week out. And that's why he's not falling off. He's being more competitive. And I'm talking about Marc Marquez. So if Brad jumps ship, would he be able to adapt? If that's all it takes, then why doesn't he look at Pedro's style, not his bike setter? Have a look at how he's riding the bike and say, okay, for the next 4 laps, that's what I'm going to try and do, and let's see how it works. Obviously, it would feel very different, but maybe. So the point is, if he jumps ship, can he adapt? I don't know. So it's an unanswerable question, but the reality is I can't see it happening. And I think it was Oli Moto who said, is he getting to the end of his sell-by date, especially by the time this KTM contract is over? Well, according to the results, yes, because understand, he's not Spanish, he's not Italian, he's got no one pulling other strings for him, which a guy like De Gianantonio probably had 3 years ago to get him into MotoGP. So it puts you on the back burner straight away. So he's between a rock and a hard place right now, and it's a difficult one.
We can't forget Brad's only known a KTM MotoGP bikes and stock and WP suspension. Has that molded him into some bad habits riding style wise, because that's how he's had to ride that bike. We saw him on the Moto2 bike, also this out of shape kind of riding style. Is that ingrained in him because of the WP suspension and because of the then trellis frame, and now and like you said, would he be able to climb on a bike that works better and break some of those bad habits of this backing it in entirely? And I mean, I don't know. It's just, the problem is when you've just read that comment to me about Pedro Acosta, that doesn't fill me with confidence. We can say, ride more like Pedro, but the fact is Pedro crashed. I don't think it's for reason. He was still fast. He was still ahead of Brad when he crashed, and he was putting pressure on the race leader. And I think it was more that he kind of ignores this tire pressure going up, and I think this time he got caught out by it. But for Pedro Acosta, 6 rides in, coming out and saying there's a problem with the front end of this bike. 6 rides in, when, and you can already feel there's a problem with the front of the bike. Those kind of things, if I was Brad, I'd be sitting down and going, geez, I've been saying this for how long? I thought we got it better. We're not. I don't know. Like you said, it's a rock and hard. It's such a difficult decision to make. As a fan, it's an easy decision. As a fan, in a perfect world, climb on a Pramac Ducati in place of Franky Morbidelli and go destroy everyone. Simple as that. As simple as that. In a reality point of view, it's more like the Sven Gruner, angel on your shoulder, going, you know what? You got a safe place. Look at Miguel Oliveira. He told KTM, I'm going on my own. I'm going to go prove myself somewhere else.
Yeah, how did that work
out? Less money. And so anyway, I think that's the perfect place to end off the Brad conversation. Is they certainly left this weekend with more questions and answers, and the team know that. Stuff we are saying here, Brad and the team know. They know it. They know it more than anyone. They'll have more insight and more knowledge, of course, but they know they're in a hard place. They know that. I think that the question now, more so than ever, is, especially, as I said, because of Marc and what he's done in the KTM, is, right, Brad, do you now start looking at your riding career and go, right, at what point is enough? And we don't have the answers to that. Only Brad and his management do.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything more we can say. It would be an interesting point. Initially, when Marc, when the rumors started, everyone was, would he, wouldn't he, will he, won't he? Then he did jump ship. Brad's not in the same position at the moment. As I mentioned, his name doesn't get bandied around at all because they know he's locked in. And as I say, whether it's from his side or KTM side, that relationship is solid. It's not going anywhere. So as much as it would be lovely to see there was a possibility, it's not going to happen. So they've got to work through this and start getting a better result and making things more towards Brad's liking, because clearly they're not at the moment.
Okay, so believe it or not, there's other riders that race in MotoGP other than Pecco, Martin, Marquez, and Binder. Behind him, 9th place, Fabio Quartararo, 20 seconds off by far, by miles, the best Japanese bike. I mean, we all know where the Yamaha exercise and the Quartararo, he's just riding the wheels off the bike, getting whatever results they can. They're trying to find a satellite team. If that doesn't happen, they're going to put more resources into a development team. Crutchlow's wild card at Mizano, I think, is now not happening because he needs surgery. So that, it's just not lining up for Yamaha at the moment. And Quartararo is just digging deep and doing what he can. It was a brilliant ride. And Russell Smith, you're absolutely right. Russell Christie Smith, it was a great ride from Fabio, but it's just not, not in the shop window because it's 9th place. It's 20 seconds off. Yes, if you really know the ins and outs of MotoGP, you can pick that apart and say, geez, that is, talk about Pecco at the front or Martin and singing their praises. That's probably on par with that performance. But I just don't know what to do with Yamaha. It's that we talk about KTM leaving with more questions than answers. It's pretty much the same for Yamaha. Yes, 9th place, 20 seconds. It's a little bit better. They brought updated aero, but they need leaps, not steps, if you know what I mean. And they're not getting them.
Yeah, I think he had a solid ride. He's definitely riding the wheels off the bike. Have a look where Rins was. I think he was about second last or last of the finishers, and nowhere. He had some great qualifying. In fact, he was competitive and just nowhere in the race. I know he ran wide in the first turn. We got punted wide, but he just doesn't seem to be prepared to put it all on the line, which all kudos to Quartararo. He really is riding that bike. He's riding it as though he's going to win, and he's, as you say, racing for 9th place. So definitely, certainly his attitude changed from when he was re-signed with Yamaha. Remember, we were talking about it. He's given up. He's out of here. This project's not working. Well, he's definitely putting his heart and soul into it. Not for the kind of results he would want or he deserves, but I think that's the best they can get out of that bike at the moment.
Olimoto, yeah, I will definitely make it a podcast. I did on Spotify have it as a podcast, talking MotoGP. And one day I woke up and it was just deleted and gone. So I don't know if MotoGP, the rights, because I had MotoGP on it or something. But yeah, I'm going to try and set it up maybe as, I don't know, I've got to think of another name, maybe without MotoGP in it, to try and keep it up. Because as I said, I had one up and it's now gone. But I am in the process of getting a new podcast link put up. Mariska Hutchinson, Paul says, is it worth 12 million? The Fabio rides, because that's what he's getting paid.
Well, clearly Yamaha, I think it is. I think, and we've mentioned this before, and I'm sure Mariska, because she always listens in, she heard, they've poached top guys from Ducati. They poached the top engine builder from Ferrari, but there's limits to what they can do this year. So maybe next year we're going to see big changes. I can't quite see it happening, but clearly if Yamaha found value, or maybe Fabio just said exactly what we were discussing with Brad. At what point do you just say, oh, well, I'm happy here. Let the money roll in. He can at least say, he can tick that box, one-time MotoGP world champion. Unfortunately, Brad hasn't ticked that box yet. But maybe he's just saying to himself, well, if they were silly enough to offer me that kind of money to stay on a bike that is no better than 9th position or 8th on a good day, well, I'm signing up. Thank you very much. Once again, I go back to my point. None of these guys are doing it purely for the money. They all believe they're going to win the world championship, and they all want to. But certainly 12 million euros can ease the pain somewhat.
Wesley 290, we're keeping you. You got to stay watching because we will touch upon Darren Binder a little bit later. Of course we will. Ollie Motor says Crash in the Race also have MotoGP in their name in their podcast on Apple. I'll definitely investigate because, like I said, I had a podcast on Spotify, and all of a sudden it was gone. So I will definitely make it happen.
Why don't you just call it Moto Rider World Live Chat?
Yeah, well, Bradley Johnson says Moto Rider GP or something, but I'll try the Talking MotoGP on a different platform and see what happens there. If it goes, then I'll change the name. That's fine. The Robin Paul Show. Quickly, let's bang through some of the other riders. 10th place, Miguel Oliveira, Olimoto, and a couple of other people spoke about it earlier when we were talking about Raul Fernandez. Another rider that's potentially on the chopping block, not doing enough to kind of keep himself in MotoGP. I think Miguel is pretty much similar to Alex Marquez, where he's got a bit of money. He's got, flying the flag for the Portuguese kind of federation and country. Is that keeping him in MotoGP at the moment? Because certainly, and the legacy of before winning those races for KTM and knowing that talent that's there, but certainly not, on current form, on paper, the last 2 years. Yes, I know he's had the injuries and an end, but certainly the last 2 years doesn't warrant a full factory Aprilia ride, which is basically what he's got within that team.
Yeah, I don't want to upset any Portuguese supporters at all, so I'll just keep mum on this. But yeah, he's certainly not delivering what he promised when he went to Aprilia. And the bike does run at the front consistently, and by the front, 5th to 7th consistently, but it's never him. And very seldom it's been his teammate. But this weekend, his teammate outshone him incredibly. Yes, okay, so he crashed when he was leading the race, Raul Fernandez. But the rest of the weekend was superb, where Oliveira just didn't feature. Also, he must be getting to, I don't know his age, he must be late 20s, early 30s, married with a child now, so maybe this is now, your mindset changes. I'll never forget, years ago, Colin Edwards said, once you hit your 30s, which by any standards is not old, but at this level, when the youngsters are 23, 24, 25, or 20 at Pedro Acosta, Colin Edwards said, it's 1/10 of a second per year from when you hit your 30s, just the natural aging process. So, you've got to take that into account, and some people defy that. Valentino Rossi, without a doubt, could defy that. And you get the odd exception to any rule in any sport. But I certainly think Colin was on the money there, saying that, unfortunately, it's a sport, your reactions get a little bit slower, your hand-eye coordination or your speed-eye coordination, whatever it is, that's just the aging factor. Is that playing an effect? We'll never know. But certainly these are things that's realistic. And, coming from a guy like Colin Edwards, who was fairly successful as a certainly World Superbikes and MotoGP, he was okay. Yes, he never won a race, but, he was always a tier or team 2 rider. He was never the leader. He brought his bit around, and he said, age is something you cannot slow the aging process. So I don't know, maybe that's affecting Oliveira. He hasn't delivered, there's no doubt.
The great 481, I think Pedro is going to be very fast throughout his career, but he will not dominate. If you caught the Moto3, you can see that David Alonso is a special rider. We've been singing David Alonso's praises. I think that kid, I know Pedro Acosta is special at the moment, and he's great. I think David Alonso is going to blow MotoGP out the water. I think he's going to take it to the next level, especially on the 800cc bikes, kind of smaller. That adaptation from Moto3, Moto2, MotoGP, I think he's going to be a bit closer. And yeah, I think he's going to come in there and do crazy things. Paul, Marco Bezzecchi in 11th. Quickly touch upon him. We've briefly spoken about it. What is he not getting right that Pecco and them were able to get right last year? Pecco came out last year with this GP24 spec bike that Marco's on, and said, there's something wrong with the front feeling. It's just not clicking. But well before 6 races, they sorted it out and went on to dominate the championship. Why is Bezzecchi struggling to find the solution with this problem? Has it now, as you said, got to his head that he's starting to think more about, I should have made that move, rather than on the project that he's in at the moment? So has his mind just kind of been lost, and he's just struggling to bring it all back?
Well, he's the exact opposite of the Alex and Marc Marquez scenario, where he was supposed to be the lead rider, and unfortunately his teammates outshining him. And his teammates doing it basically, except for his comments after this weekend, flying under the radar, where everything focuses around Bezzecchi, and suddenly he's not performing. And I do think it's got into his head. He's 2 things. He's now come out and said, well, maybe I made the wrong decision. So that's playing on his mind. And his teammates beating him, which he hasn't said that yet. because he doesn't want, that's admitting defeat, to say, oh, but this oak's going faster than me. So I definitely think something has got inside his head and he's just struggling. I mean, you saw the comments after this weekend. He said he actually has to pull on the handlebars to turn the bike. Now he's unsure of what to do. He's now watching Alex Marquez, Gian Antonio, Marc Marquez, all on the same bike as him, and they're not struggling, they're not complaining. So suddenly he's up in arms. He's kind of in a situation where he's now not sure which way to go. So I think he's going to have to really knuckle down to pull himself out of this hole because of the fact he's doubting his decision and he's getting beaten by his teammate.
Alex van den Berg, Sergio Garcia as well. I agree with you. Another top talent. There's quite a few of them coming through, which is exciting for the sport. 12th place, Paul, Maverick Vinales. Just that weekend that, a couple of rounds ago, we were saying, right, could it be this is what happens. He just, on weekends where it's not working, he just cannot make it work. And this is unfortunately why we'll never be able to really, we believe it, and you'll never really be able to say Maverick Vinales is a title contender.
Yeah. Well, I've said it a billion times. He's my Luca Catalora of the 2020s. When he's on it, you don't come close to him. But he's on it 1 or 2 weekends for the year, and that's it. The rest of the time, he's not even mediocre on the equipment he's got and his teammates. And I said it. We thought after, when did he dominated in America? Have they now changed their thinking and they're putting him as number one? Well, after the last 2 weekends, if that's what they were doing, they're like, sorry, bud, we're going back to Aleix. He's more committed. So I don't know. He just seems to dig his own hole week in and week out. And you'll probably find, watch him now this weekend in Mugello, you'll find he's either going to be right at the front or he's going to be 12th and 13th again. There's no consistency to him, which is disappointing. If he just ran 6th place every single race, we'd moan and say, he only ever comes 6th. But it would be a more consistent thing. It must be so difficult as a team manager. This week he drills everyone, and next week he can't qualify in the top 15. What do you do? So I don't know. That's Maverick. It's been his whole career.
Olimoto makes a good point with Bezzecchi. Last year was talked about the factory ride, one of the contenders. I mean, he's not even being remotely spoken about. So that's also going to be denting his confidence and playing on his mind that I should have just taken that Pramac ride because I would have been one step closer. There's no doubt about it. Pedro Acosta, we've spoken about. One thing I will say about Acosta, he crashes, picks it up, and still finishes ahead of Nakagami, Jean-Mir, Zarco, and Luca Marini. Look, Nakagami, we know, we've spoken about him. Mir looks defeated and game over to me, talking about if I crash, I'm going to hurt my body. I don't know what's going to happen with Mir, if he's even going to stay in motorcycle racing. I know World Superbikes is an option for him. People are talking, but where? But on a Honda and World Superbikes, where he's going to crash more. Big question mark around Mir. Zarco, we know his role within Honda at the moment there. Just develop, try and do what you can. Nakagami, you just ride around, but kudos to Nakagami, who was the top Honda rider in 14th. But to be beaten by a KTM rookie that just went down complaining about his front tire, Luca Marini. I mean, Marini was very upset ahead of the weekend that people were talking that he wants to jump ship and he wants to cancel his contract. Surely Honda have got to be looking at it going, we signed you to not crash the bike and develop, but yes, we can't develop a bike that's running at the back of the track.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just nowhere. Well, I read a thing on Facebook or somewhere that said, well, he's the most consistent rider in MotoGP. He's got the same amount of points in every single race. 0. He hasn't scored a single point. I mean, that's on a factory Honda. It's I don't even, but you said it, Rob. You said, did he deserve his place on a Ducati in MotoGP? And you get those riders. Alex Marquez, 2 times world champion. You can't take that away from him. Luca Marini, I think in his career he's won 5 races. Mm-hmm. And we've said it many times. No disrespect. These are the fastest guys in the world. Mm-hmm. But now he's jumped on a bike that's not great, and he's been exposed horribly. So you were right when you said that. I can't remember when you said that. I think when he had just signed with Honda. The fact that he's on a factory Honda, it's actually meaningless because he's nowhere. And me personally, I was a bit disappointed in Zarco. He has been the best Honda by a long shot, and he just had a very bad weekend. He did get punted from behind. I think it was by Alex Marquez, but he didn't have a great weekend, which is kind of unlike him. I mean, he's been okay on the Honda, okay being 10th, 11th, 12th. So he had a disappointing weekend. But as for Marini, as you rightfully said, he's now been very exposed.
Yeah, he is absolutely. There's no doubt about that. There was something I want to do. Olimoto, cannot wait for Magellan, the most beautiful track I've ever been to. I second that. It is just,
Yeah, me too.
And I cannot wait for it. The next rider I was going to talk about is Aleix Espargaro. You get told to do 2 long lap penalties, and you don't do them. Yeah. And I can understand in a way that he would have been aggrieved for the first one because it was a tight move. I don't understand this. Okay, you ran straight. He lost the position and he lost time, but you didn't lose enough time to get a penalty. So I don't quite agree with that. If I saw a couple of riders go through there and they lost positions and lost time, but you didn't lose enough time. Well, but I lost a position and time. So is that not a penalty enough, for God's sake? Yeah. So anyway, I understand how he was shunted off and he would have been aggrieved. But Anaya, if you're told to do a long lap penalty, do a long lap penalty. And then Espargaro didn't do it. And I think that was just pure frustration of maybe had been told that weekend that you're definitely not in the team for next year. I don't know, but it was a very bad display for the Aleix Espargaro kind of brand this weekend.
Yeah. And you know, Rob, if there was a 1% chance of him staying at Ducati, which I think 1% is an exaggerated percentage of him staying there, he just blew that, because even though I agree with his thinking that he got punted off the track, he ran wide, he didn't get any advantage, and he gave the position back, even though he had run wide. It wasn't his decision to negotiate that. He hasn't got put to rider communication like in Formula One, where he could say to David Tardotti, listen, go tell those oaks, I got punted off the track, I dropped time, this is rubbish. He can't do that. So just serve the penalty and go fight with everyone afterwards. He took that upon himself, which was kind of a big FU to the officials as well as to Ducati, because remember, it's some oak at Ducati, I presume, who punches that into the computer that illuminates it on his dashboard. So it came from them, unless I'm incorrect, and Race Direction have access to their ECUs or their dashboards. I don't know how that works. But the point is, he kind of said, don't tell me what to do. It wasn't my fault. So I do think he's really severed that tie. If there was a minuscule point of percentage of him staying at Ducati, just by that arrogance of, I'll do what suits me, not what suits you. And as I say, I actually agree with his thinking. Yeah. It wasn't his call to make. He had got the penalty. Clearly someone from Ducati runs up to race control and looks at Freddie Spencer again and says, you can't do that. But they, I don't know if you read after the story with Zarka, once Race Direction have made that, you cannot go and negotiate with them. When they've made their decision, it's final. There is no recourse. But anyway, so I think he severed that tie properly after this weekend.
Yeah, Olimoto, we're trying to keep it nice and clean now after the earlier comments. So yeah, you brought that back nicely there, Paul. This is bull.
Almost, eh?
Well done. No. Listen, you pulled it in nicely. 2 last big talking points before we end this. We'll start with Jack Miller. Now, I didn't get to watch the racing live because I had my son and his friend here, and I went and fetched them, brought them back to our flat. Not thinking, they'll have fun playing, but not thinking we don't have a garden or anything. Got myself set up, and I just heard this, Dad, when can we go play football? Dad, Uncle Rob Jay's dad, when can we go play football? And I was like, I'm not going to get to watch my bike, am I? Okay, let's go play football. Let's go. So I went and played football. And while I'm on the football field, I got a couple of messages that I ignored. Then I get this one from my good mate, Paul, Spiller Miller. But now, hang on. Now I'm thinking, oh, God, he's taken Brad out. He's taken 9 riders out into turn 1. He's ruined this championship. Brad's broken his leg. Oh, my God. But anyway, I watched the race afterwards, and Jack crashed. Jack just looks defeated. Jack looks defeated. Looks like he's given up. I don't blame him. I've fought the fight for as long as I can, and you've kind of spelt it out. In the reality side, pretty much like we're doing with Brad at the moment. We're spelling out the reality side, which is sometimes very hard to take. It's a hard pill to swallow, but that's what it is. And unfortunately, I mean, Jack will do very well to find himself in gas next year and on a MotoGP grid, to be honest. There's talk of the Honda ride. I think that could be a very good option for Jack when Jean Mir goes. Jack, why not? He's got experience in Ducati, KTM, Honda previously. He brings something. Did he help the KTM project? That you can never take away from him. Yes, he did. He did take it to a point that has been maxed out, and they don't know where to go next. They've hit a brick wall. They don't know where to go. So I think for this point, Jack's best options are finance-wise, the factory Honda, or I still want a chance to be competitive, ride the gas. But even that, it's a hard argument to have. Oli Moto and a couple of other people saying it's got to be World Superbikes. Go to World Superbikes, climb on a Ducati Panigale V4 if Bautista calls it quits and try go win there. But it's a hard argument to have now for Jack Miller in MotoGP.
Yeah, Rob, how many more chances does he deserve? He started on a Honda. He then moved to Ducati, first with Pramac, then with a factory Ducati. So it's not like he was always in a second-tier team. He had the factory bike. Now he's on a factory KTM. He just hasn't... I think he's given us the best Jack Miller we're ever going to see. Me personally, I think it is time to move on, whether it's World Superbikes or farming with Casey Stoner and building motocross tracks in Australia. I wouldn't like to see him go to Honda. I think he would be better there than a Marini or a Jean Mir. But I'm going to say what I said at the beginning or the end of last season. Get a new-blooded youngster like a Pedro Acosta. Yes, he's taken. Furman Aldeguer's taken. There's Garcia. There's not too many after that. Garcia is I think he's going to win the championship this year. But anyway, take a guy with zero expectation, put him on that bike. It's only a 2-year plan because we know 2027, everything changes. So take a guy with zero expectation. Don't try you're not going to get the Honda to a winning bike by the end of this formula. It's not going to happen. They've got 2 years to do it. It's never going to happen. So put someone on the bike with low expectations or no expectations. Let them do as well as they can do for 2 seasons. You're not ruining someone's career a la Jean Mir, whose legacy is now going to be riding the Honda or Marini. Could be my opinion. But I said that at the beginning of the year. And we saw with Pedro Acosta, jumped on the bike with no expectations and went fast immediately. So get a fast rider, put him on the Honda and see where it goes. Let Jack, let Mir, put these guys out to pasture. And start blooding the new kids in the formula. That's what I think should happen. Jack said, he's been there, I don't know, must be his 11th season. He's won a few races and he's been good for the show. Absolutely, no doubt. Yes. But in terms of keeping his bum in a seat, I don't think he deserves one, honestly. I think put someone new in there, let's move on. Thank you, Jack, for everything. And put him as a test rider for Honda. Could be a fantastic idea.
So before I get on to Franky Morbidelli, which we'll touch upon quickly, Oli Moto kind of brought up, and Oli Moto and everyone else in the comments, I'd love to hear what you guys think of this. And you, Paul, obviously I'm putting the question out there, but this Iannone being mentioned as a MotoGP rider, potentially with Aprilia, and could this be the Italian rider on a Aprilia that Aprilia are talking about? Really? Does Iannone really want to entertain that? Yes, he's done fantastically well in World Superbikes, but you haven't gone out and won races and cleared the field up to, you're not beating a 40-whatever-year-old Alvaro Bautista. Yes, it's a factory bike and go 11, but he's done brilliantly. Don't get me wrong, and I love Iannone. I absolutely love Iannone. But, Oli Moto's talking about Jack would find a nice place in World Superbikes. That environment would fit him more, less travel, less pressure of media, and do you honestly think, first of all, Iannone is worthy enough to come back into MotoGP with so many other riders potentially top rack, in World Superbikes? Or there's so many other names I could think of, but is it purely because of the Iannone name and his previous MotoGP experience that he's being mentioned? Do you see that happening, and do you see him wanting to do that? I just see a happy rider in World Superbikes. Why would you want to now go back into MotoGP, probably fail the first half of the season minimum, and put yourself in that position to fail when you're thriving?
Look, he has surprised me in World Superbikes, but my argument or my point would be he was Dovizioso's teammate, never beat Dovizioso in the championship. I think he won 4 races in his career.
Yeah.
MotoGP. He was good on the Moto2 bike, but Dovizioso took 1 year off, came back into MotoGP, and MotoGP had moved 5 years ahead of him. He just couldn't get going. Yes, he was on the satellite Yamaha, but that's not the point. Ianone's been out of MotoGP for, this is his 5th season, maybe even his 6th. So personally, I wouldn't want to see him in there. He'd be taking a ride away from someone who'd earned it. Yes, he had a name back in the day, but as I say, Dovizioso beat him every year that they were teammates. So putting him back in the championship, I think personally, and as you say, he can't beat Alvaro Bautista. Put him back in MotoGP, he will get such a fright as to how competitive it is and how fast it is. So I hope nobody's seriously entertaining that. I believe it's just clickbait stuff. Aprilia, I think, would be making such a mistake. Anyone, Bastianini, Bezzecchi, will ride circles around him on a MotoGP bike. So I hope it's just clickbait.
I think it is. Olimoto, I think, has got it right. I think he'll either get a factory Ducati ride if Bautista doesn't continue for next year, and if not, I think he'll be alongside Toprak in the factory BMW team, which is, I kind of posted it about a month ago, and everyone slated me on the Motor Rider World Facebook page saying this is clickbait, it'll never happen. Trust me, I know for a fact that the discussions have happened between Iannone and that factory BMW team. I do think his first port of call would want to be Bautista's ride, but Bautista's just come out saying now, I'm feeling good, I'm feeling young, I might go another year. So that'll delay that whole process.
And I can tell you, if Iannone does go to BMW, he'll be like Scott Redding. He won't see which way Toprak's gone compared to him, my opinion. I just think he'll get a fright.
You think so?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think it'll be as bad as Redding. Jeez. I think it'll be similar to Van der Mark, or maybe a bit better. I do think Toprak is more special. I do agree with that. To finish the MotoGP conversation, before we get on to Moto2 and just quickly end off with Darren, Franky Morbidelli, that exercise, I kind of gave him the grace, not kind of starting the season with testing and that. Glimpses, but something's just not there with Franky in my eye.
Yeah, Rob, I don't know what it is. He had those great 2 years on the Yamaha, and then since then, yes, then he had a bad year and he got injured, but he just doesn't seem to be able to come out of this hole that he's in, whether it's a psychological thing from the injuries or whether it's just, I don't know what it is. I mean, now he's on a bike that he should have absolutely no excuse. It doesn't mean he's got to go and win, but he should be running top 5, top 6 consistently. And he's just not finding his way there. Every now and again, he puts in a couple of great laps in practice and in qualifying. But as soon as they're racing, he just, maybe he's got a little bit scared. I don't know. The first turn, he seems to just shoot backwards, and then you've lost that. I mean, Marc even said, you cannot be behind riders for 5 and 6 laps. So, he was okay for the first 4 laps of Sunday's race, Franky. But then he just, like Jack, works his way steadily towards the back. I don't know what it is. It just seems like, and once again, we don't see the guy. They never show him in the pits. And, watching their faces, you get a good look at what their demeanor's like. And you can see now currently Brad's a little bit frustrated. Marc's happy. Pecco's the same, because Pecco's life is, that's his demeanor. You can see Martin, you can see exactly how it is. We don't see Franky in the pits. So you never know what's going on, but something's not gelling, whether it's the team, whether it's him, I don't know. Just not. And I mean, he's really, you go back to the Yamaha days and Moto2 days. I mean, Moto2, he dominated. So definitely the ability is there. I don't think anyone's questioning that. But is the drive there? Is it what's lacking? I don't know.
Oliver just said, I saw Franky at Mazan last week. He was very relaxed and funny. He's slowly improving on that Ducati, but not quick enough. And I think that pretty much sums it up perfectly. And Repsol Honda out. Honda, obviously Marini didn't bring the necessary exposure. We've kind of touched upon that little big media car. I think that whole exercise has just been a huge flop. Okay, Paul, strap yourself in. Everybody strap yourself in. Darren Binder, Moto2. Everyone, Michael White, Alex van den Berg saying Mugello going to be good for Darren. I was with Darren at Mugello when he was on the MotoGP bike, and he really did ride well that weekend. He really, for me, that was the first real weekend I looked at Darren as a, you're a MotoGP rider. You can do this. I was so impressed with Darren at that Mugello round. It's just not working in Moto2. Again, we've got to speak realistically here. It's not working. This weekend there was a glimmer of hope for WP suspension bikes. Celestino Vietti was up there. Senna Aegis, Darren's teammate, put in a brilliant ride. There were a few Dixon on the podium. There were a few hints that they got something right. Low grip track, maybe that was in their favor. We're going to have to see how they go at Mugello and other tracks, but there were certainly signs. And it was an improved ride from Darren. He got 14th overall because one rider got penalized, so his 15th became 14th. Still just not good enough. It's just not good enough in terms of if Darren wants to keep himself in the running for a ride in Moto2. What I will say is that plays in his favor is the fact that a lot of WP riders haven't been performing. The IO team that has dominated Moto2 is not performing. Vietti crashed out, although he showed signs, but Onshu's nowhere. Dixon's been nowhere. Okay, he shone this weekend. So there's a couple of things in favor of Darren to say this is why he's struggling, is that WP and the Pirelli exercise is just not working. But then but your teammate, your rookie teammate. And I think people play on that a little bit too much. Senna Aegis has done wildcard rides for Marc VDS a couple of years ago. He did a full Moto2, that Spanish championship or the European championship. So he's well versed with Moto2, but still, first full season in Moto2 and he's outshining Darren. So it's worrying. Yes, we took the positives that he got points and he didn't throw it in the scenery and he got more track time, which was great. But there's got to be results very soon for Darren if he wants to find himself in Moto2, because as Oli Moto and a couple of other people say, a career in World Supersport and World Superbike, maybe, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's a very difficult one, and we've discussed it, and it's, I think, the same discussion. He needs to bring the results. We said that after last week's race. We said that about their team. Is it the team? What are they not gelling? What's going on there? And suddenly, look what Senna does this weekend. He only qualified from into Q2 one place ahead of Darren, but then he was much better in the qualifying session, and he was fantastic in the race. He earned his 8th place, and then he overtook a couple of people. So really a competent race from the youngster. So, Darren, as much as we say, don't worry about the teammate that's, the first guy you want to beat is your teammate, because in theory, you are on identical equipment. So the story which we discussed after last week's race or the week before, we said, is the team not gelling? And it seems now Senna has just showed us that maybe this bike is capable. Yes, I agree with you, Rob. Low grip track. It's the first time we've seen the bikes with WP suspension doing as well as this. So is it a once-off? Well, let's judge by this weekend. But irrespective, Darren needs to move further up the grid. He needs to start, he's got to be closer to that top 10. He has to be closer to that, to have any idea of being kept in his ride or getting a ride for next year, hovering around 14th, 15th, 16th. Unfortunately, it's not going to cut it, because you're going to have these David Alonso's, Holgado. There's probably a crop of 6 or 8 youngsters moving up from, or who would want to move up from Moto3. So, you've got to up your game a little bit, Darren, to hold on to that ride. And his teammate seems to have done that. But let's not count the whole season on one ride. But it wasn't that he was one place ahead of Darren. I think he was 11 seconds ahead. So that's quite that's almost 3/4 of a second per lap. Eh?
Yeah, Karen saying, surprisingly, Darren Darren has quite a few big names around him, and that's the kind of thing that's the positives you take as a fan.
For sure.
Right, he's performing because the WP, and that's not there, but he's still beating some of these guys. The problem with Moto2 is it's so easy to get lost in there. Foggia was the next best Italian thing. Ivan Guevara, the next best thing. He's lost in there. Diego Moreira made the step up from Moto3 to Moto2 this year. He was the next, Supermoto champ, Brazilian. Everyone touted him for last year's Moto3 title. Didn't work. He came into Moto2. He's nowhere. It's Joe Roberts has been there for an eternity, and he's kind of now starting to shine again, but he's fallen by the wayside. Dixon, it's so easy just to get lost in that championship. And Dixon can afford to get lost there because he's got a British passport.
Yeah.
Guevara can afford to get lost there because he's got a Spanish passport. Foggia can afford to get lost there. Darren's got the South African passport, and not a lot of money. That means nothing. So
it's a very limiting factor.
It's a hard one. I'm hoping that Darren's relationship with the team is strong enough that they go, you know what? We understand this. It was a big change. Yes, Senna's done well. We're keeping him on board, but there's no one else we want to have other than Darren. Darren, we're going to give you another shot. I don't know if that's how things work these days in MotoGP in that paddock, though. I mean, how many chances do you really get? He got one chance in MotoGP, which in reality we always knew was only going to be one chance. As much as we clinged on to this hope that he was going to get another chance, he was never going to. But Ollie Motor says Dixon also had better race results in it. Darren, up until now, Moto2 wise, has not produced any results. Alex van der Berg, Barry Bolter started the season off with a podium. He's going to be the next best thing, qualified second last. So Moto2 is just this roller coaster and this carousel and this horror movie in many ways that you just don't know. And I think, as I said, the positive sign for Darren was there was more consistency. He didn't throw the bike down the road. He brought the bike home in very tricky conditions. But we said it a couple of races ago, he's got to build from that. If you're going to consistently be within that 14th to 18th, not going to cut it. He's got to go to a Mugello now and be closer to the top 10 and then slowly eke away at those kind of things. People in the comments, when we talk about Brad and riders struggling and Darren saying, are they putting too much pressure on themselves? Yes, but they have to. It's that environment. If you're not putting pressure on yourself, go fishing. You've got to put pressure on yourself. It's managing that pressure. But it's also, like I said at the start of the show, where Brad is in many ways, is that sometimes it's out of your control. That chaos will let go of you when it wants to let go of you. And you start thinking, am I waking up on the wrong side of the bed? Am I eating the wrong food? Am I putting the wrong sock on? Am I, all those kind of little things start playing on your mind. And we just need better results from Darren. And he knows that. The team knows that. But it's got to start happening.
Yeah. And it is such a high-pressured environment. You've got if you add all the riders in all the classes together, there's probably 75 riders. You've got the 75 best riders fighting for the 75 best rides. So you need to, and then there's every guy in the Spanish championship, every guy in the British championship, every youngster in America who, it's a high pressure environment. So as you said, if you can't handle the pressure, go fishing. So how you deal with the pressure, each person deals with it differently. Darren needs to, because his pressure increased this weekend, because now his teammate had such a great weekend, he needs to just sit down at Mugello. And I'm going to say he loves Mugello, but I don't think there's a rider on that circuit who doesn't. He needs to sit down, regroup, see exactly what the bike's going to be like once they've had the first session on Friday. And I think his goal this weekend is he's got to be looking at a top 10, and that's, you have a look how competitive that field is, but his teammate can do it. He can do it. He's beaten his teammate in, I think, every race they finished this year together. He's beaten him except this weekend. So come on, Darren, we know you can do it. The speed is there. Something needs to just move up a notch, and I'm sure he can do it. Like you said, you've watched him at Mugello. You were with him. It's a special place. It brings out special in everybody. But let's see how it goes for him. But he's certainly that South African passport, and a lot of people who've never been to a MotoGP in Europe won't understand the culture. That culture is based around those European riders. Jake Dixon's not far away, but the money's there, the interest is there, everything is built around the Spanish and the Italians, predominantly a couple of Frenchies too, so benefits them. Once Darren comes back here, boy, nobody sees him. It's not like they bump into him at the shopping center on the weekend. Well, if you live in Italy, chances are you're going to bump into Pecco somewhere. And, so that's the thing. The South African riders who, once they're out of that fold, you're out of sight, out of mind. So it's very difficult. So hopefully something gels this weekend in a big way and good result for him. It just keeps him in the spotlight a little bit.
Graham Wright kind of sums it up perfectly at the moment. Unfortunately, Darren is a competitor and not a contender at this stage. Olimoto, I hate Olimoto because he brings the stats. I don't hate you, Olimoto. I just hate your comments sometimes because you bring the reality and the stats to it. Darren has only won once in 7 years in Moto3. He's done a great deal to get attention from teams. He needs to find his right move next season, and I hope it works out for him. And Wayne Taylor says the same. That's why he wants him to move, to rather try something new in another paddock. And these are things you can't argue with. Russell Smith, we are very fortunate to have two SA riders in the MotoGP at the same time. I'm thankful to have witnessed that. We've got KJ Monyanyane and Rushain Woodley and Red Bull rookies that are going to be potentially there. But it frustrates me because there's more to Darren. I know there's more to Darren. Darren knows there's more to Darren. I think the paddock and the teams that have believed in him know there's more to Darren. And it just, for some reason, can't come out. Not that it doesn't want to, it just cannot come out. And that's what kills me. As a friend, as a fan, as a pundit, it just kills me that it's almost like we're just, for some reason, restrained from seeing the true Darren Binder. Hate it.
Yeah. And unfortunately, there isn't a magic wand that anyone can wave to suddenly say, okay, Darren, this is your time to shine. It's got to come from him. And I 100% know that it's not from a lack of trying.
I know. I'm trying to get a signed replica from him for my collection. And every time we do these shows, I'm like, please, don't take it the wrong way. I want my replica, please. But anyway, It's been a great show. Olimoto, everyone that's commented, Giovanni, Erasmus, do not forget to vote, guys. Lack of sleep. Yeah, please just hit that like button. Don't forget to vote. Yeah, South Africans, don't forget to vote. But Paul's been another fantastic show. Really just pulled as much as we can out of everything that we've spoken about. I think a lot of it has made a lot of sense, good and bad. And look forward to a great weekend at Mugello this weekend. It always brings out fantastic racing. I do think it is in some ways like Catalunya, where it's a bit more, and Jerez, where it's a bit more of a true reflection of who is where. And that's a reality check in many ways. And Catalunya was this weekend that Pecco, Martin, and Marc are the benchmark. And, the KTM's the third best bike, and Brad and them have got work to do. I think that's where it's going to be. I think we're going to see big speeds by the KTMs and Brad and probably Pedro as well. I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that there can be a couple more answers rather than questions from this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. And the good thing about it, Rob, 7 more sleepies and we can do it all over again.
That's it. Next week, Tuesday, we'll be chatting about talking MotoGP Mugello. Hopefully I'll have the podcast up by then. I'll try and get into that on Thursday or Friday. But yeah, in the meantime, again, thank you to every single person that's tuned in here. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe, shared it, all your comments. We absolutely love it. And Paul, have a great week further. Same to everyone else. And we'll catch you same time next week, Tuesday, talking MotoGP Mugello.
Thanks, everyone who tuned in. Thanks, Rob. That was absolutely fantastic. And I'm sure the racing is going to be at the top draw once again. See you all next Tuesday.
Goodbye.
Cheers.